Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 658, Oracle I2. Within the confines of a quiet office, a certain figure sat behind the desk, slowly compiling a series of papers. Aldrich looked busy at work. This was only natural considering everything that was unfolding behind the scenes of the Ivinus household. If he wanted to create a power strong enough to rival that of the royal family, he had to handle a lot of things. But he wasn't far off from achieving that sort of power. Everything had been set in motion for quite some time and everyone was completely oblivious to it. There were only a few more things for him to handle before he could blow everything up. "Sir?" A figure appeared next to Aldrich. Without looking, Aldrich extended his hand and received a piece of paper. He looked through it for a brief moment before frowning. "That is a bit faster than I expected." The paper detailed to him the current situation within the Church of Oracleus. It wasn't good. The church was slowly starting to fall apart. "So not only is the cardinal sick, but the saint appears to be losing his mind?" "Yes, that is correct." The figure standing next to Aldrich answered. "From what we've uncovered, the saint has lost a significant amount of weight and begun abusing his power, killing multiple servants as well as other members of the church. His mental degradation is quite obvious to the people. Although the church and the round table have tried to cover it up, rumors have started to spread, sparking public outcry. Some are even calling for his replacement." Aldrich's eyes narrowed. The situation was moving at a pace that was faster than he had previously calculated. Was the rejection of the blood too much for the saint to handle? This wasn't good news. Emmett needed to be back before the saint completely absorbed all of the blood, because by the time he did, Torin would finally make his move. Torin was merely waiting for the saint to fully integrate with the blood before taking action. Aldrich had originally expected the absorption to take a few more months to a year, but at the current rate it might take less. This is not ideal. Aldrich pursed his lips as he raised his head to look at the ceiling. Closing his eyes, he leaned back against the chair. At least I hope he managed to get to the remnant south. If he did, he wouldn't need to worry too much. That was because Aldrich knew he was going to meet her. So long as he met her, then everything would flow more smoothly. He just hoped that everything flowed smoothly. It was a race against time. Lazarus stared at his shadow. It was dimmer than usual, its color fading a little more with every passing second he stared at it. He understood that he didn't have much time. However, he still remained calm. There was no use in panicking. He understood that he'd soon receive a breakthrough in the situation. Silas was probably going to make a move and he was going to wait for that moment. Until then, I'll focus on trying to get the eye. The eye was the key to everything. So long as he managed to get it, he'd be able to return to the world outside the mirror. This place, it felt suffocating. It held a beauty of its own. The architecture and various areas were striking, but beneath that charm lay something poisonous. Everything within this place was dangerous, and the dry air that filtered through the surroundings made it hard to admire anything. Lazarus was slowly starting to understand why the gods had turned mad. Not only were they slowly being consumed by the power of the source, but they were also stuck in such a harrowing and suffocating place. Anyone would go mad when being stuck here for so long. But that was of no concern to him. He wasn't like them. He could go out any time and now held the key to tapping into the source without going mad. The key to it all was emotive magic. Level 5. He was almost there. It was right as Lazarus was about to move when he felt the presence of a figure standing next to him. "When did he? What do you think of the cathedral? It looks nice, doesn't it?" His voice was warm, and standing beside him felt almost like standing next to the sun. His long blonde hair swayed gently and his eyes, matching his own hair in color, stood out brilliantly against the white garbs he wore. He looked like the embodiment of the sun itself as he slowly turned his head to look at him. "It cost us quite a bit to build, but it was worth it. It gave us a vantage point to observe the surroundings. That way if something does happen, we'll see it coming." From the way he was speaking, it was almost as though he was speaking to a longtime friend. Lazarus tried to maintain indifference as he listened to the man's words. He was also quite surprised to see that no one was particularly looking in their direction. It was almost as if their presence had been completely erased from the world. "Judging from your face, you must be wondering about my identity. Why did a random man I know nothing about suddenly show up out of nowhere? More or less." "Ha ha." The man laughed at Lazarus's bluntness, seemingly finding the situation amusing. He was just about to speak when Lazarus spoke. "My guess is you're with the church. Your strength isn't exactly ordinary, and since you're not wearing the standard white robes like the other luminarchs, I'd say you hold a higher rank." Lazarus felt his body tense as he spoke. He could feel it with every part of his body that the man before him was incredibly strong. However, since he had already been found by him, Lazarus also knew that running away was impossible. "Since you came to find me directly, you're obviously here for me. Is it about what happened in Verithanash?" "Verithanash?" Lazarus raised his brow when he saw the man raise his brow in confusion. He isn't aware? I did hear about something happening there. That was you? Lazarus didn't reply. Was his original guess wrong? He had originally expected the man to approach him because of what had happened there and that his disguise had been seen through, but that wasn't the case at all. Then, wow, the way the man looked at Lazarus changed. He looked almost impressed. Taking a look at you, I thought you were rather weak. I didn't expect you to be some sort of secret powerhouse. I guess the goddess did have a reason for calling for you. The goddess? Lazarus's facade almost broke upon hearing the man's words. He didn't hear wrong, right? The goddess. She was the one who sent the man to him? Then. Looks like you have a vague idea about my identity. With a smile, the man stepped back and lowered his head slightly. Allow me to formally introduce myself. I am the voice of the goddess Pahi, the ruler of light, her chosen speaker. I am the current living saint. Extending his hand towards me, he continued. I am officially here on her behalf to invite you to the Ashen Steeple. The goddess would like to have a meeting with you. She has been expecting you. Swoosh. Swoosh. In that moment, as though the veil that was shrouding their presence dropped, all heads turned in their direction. Ah, isn't that the saint? Seeing the commotion around him, Lazarus closed his eyes and tried his best not to smile. He had really put him in a tough situation. Please be careful with the box. There's a lot of important stuff inside. And sighed while looking at the people he had hired moving the boxes towards a small storage unit. While their original intention was to open up a merchant store, the process was complicated. A lot of paperwork needed to be filled out and the number of salas needed in order to make everything work out was astronomical. It wasn't worth the cost, especially since they weren't planning on staying for long. Oh, you're here? Just as he managed to sort everything within the storage unit and appeared from a distance. It took a moment for Inez to recognize her as she wore a disguise. Did you find anything? Yes. And looked around. Is the merchant not around? Not yet. He seems to have gone towards the city center. The center? And thought for a moment before mumbling, could he have gone to the church? That's the only thing I'd say is worth visiting. Probably. And has turned towards the distant cathedral. He stared at it and felt almost nothing. There was a time when he had dreamed of entering that church, of becoming a luminarch and earning a seat at the table. But now looking at it, the feeling was gone. Why was that? What had changed? Inez was left at a loss. He felt that his obsession with the goddess had somewhat diminished ever since his journey from Virathanash. His thoughts turned a little complicated when thinking about it. Was this a good or a bad thing? Could this be due to the primordial one? Inez didn't know, but he decided to discard such thoughts for now as he got and to help him sort out the situation. That merchant said to meet here at about this time. Let's wait for him for a bit and see if he shows up. And what if he doesn't show up? I don't know. Inez licked his lips. He just hoped that no incident would occur from this moment forward. But how could his wishes ever occur? A sudden commotion rippled through the area as Inez and exchanged a glance. Turning toward the source of the noise, they saw a crowd of people rushing toward the city center. Quick! Hurry! We might miss it. What's going on? Why are they all rushing there? Both of them suddenly started to have a bad feeling all of a sudden. And then, just as they began to move to understand what was happening, they heard someone scream, "The living saint. The living saint has left the church. He's inviting someone to the church. Hurry." Huh? What? The eyes of the two widened as they looked at each other. Then, they both rushed into the crowd. Chapter 659, Panthea 1. The commotion caused by the living saint was large. Almost everyone within the plaza turned their attention towards them. It's the saint. Swoosh. Swoosh. Everyone knelt on the ground holding onto their hands while silently praying towards the figure standing next to Lazarus, who took all of this in with a smile. He looked used to this type of scene. Feeling the numerous gazes of the people around, Lazarus remained indifferent as he looked towards the living saint. Though he didn't speak, his meaning was clear. Yes, I do believe we should go. Smiling again, the living saint stepped forward and moved towards the distant cathedral. Lazarus followed from behind as the crowd parted. Thankfully, none of them dared to cause any trouble. As Lazarus looked around, he could see the amount of reverence the people had for the living saint. His face showed no signs of change as he walked back into the cathedral. At the same time, his mind churned with all sorts of thoughts. So the goddess is indeed alive and she expects me? Why is that? Could it be that she detected something from me, or is there more that meets the eye? Lazarus's feelings were a little mixed. From everything he had heard, this goddess, she didn't seem like a person worth trusting. Especially since he had once tried killing her. Or at least sworn to. We're almost here. Stopping before a certain door, the living saint turned towards Lazarus as he reached for the door. I'll be stopping here. The goddess will be waiting for you at the top of the stairs. I hope you have a productive conversation with her. With that, he turned to the door and opened it, revealing a long flight of stairs spiraling upward. Lazarus stared at them in silence for a moment, then gave a small nod and stepped forward, beginning the slow ascent. Shortly after he moved up, the door closed behind him and the world around him grew silent. The only thing he could hear was the slow and rhythmic sound of his own steps. They echoed loudly within his mind as he slowly and gradually made his way up. Until he finally reached the top, where the space opened up into a large flat room. The room barely had any decoration. It was a simple hexagonal space that offered an unobstructed view of the entire city from all sides. At its center sat a woman with long flowing blonde hair, her back turned toward him. She wore a white dress and her entire presence appeared to radiate an indescribable purity that made one want to worship. For a moment Lazarus's gaze got lost in her back. He felt like bending over and worshipping her. "You came." This sense of worship only heightened the moment she spoke, her soft and melodious voice sounding like that of an angel. Lazarus had to take a deep breath in order to calm himself down. "What other option did I have? You called for me." "That is true." Though he couldn't see her, it almost felt as though she was smiling. "I wasn't sure at first, but now that I see you I can tell that you must be the one that Noel sent." "The one that Noel sent?" Lazarus paused for a moment before coming to an understanding. "So this was the case? You must be here for the eye, correct?" "Correct." Given the way she was speaking, it became clear that she was aware of why he was here and that Noel had made some sort of agreement with her. "You must also be aware that the eye is in the eclipse, correct?" Lazarus didn't answer. He thought that at first, but now he wasn't so sure anymore. The goddess was alive and just standing before her felt extremely pressuring. Surely she might have it? "You don't seem to be convinced that it is? I heard that you lost it during a big fight. That is what the rumors suggest." Those weren't rumors." The goddess gently spoke over Lazarus. "I indeed fought a long battle and ended up losing my scepter in the process. The eye was embedded deep into the scepter. If you wish to collect the eye, you must go directly into the eclipsed maw." Lazarus frowned. "Why didn't you try to collect it? If the scepter contained the eye then?" "Because I can't." The goddess answered calmly. "The battle was one where I barely came out on top. It took everything from me, and even now, I am still suffering the consequences of the battle." The goddess paused there, but from her subtly shifting tone Lazarus could tell that those weren't memories she wanted to recall. "So Noel is that strong?" Lazarus did recall hearing that the one she fought was mortem. In that case, for him to make such a strong figure suffer like this, he was certainly extremely strong. But still, something still made no sense to him. Why did you fight him in the first place? If she fought him and suffered such injury, why was she willing to help someone he had sent? Did they make some sort of agreement during the fight? That could be the case. At least that was what Lazarus believed at first. His mind blanked the moment he heard her next words. "Why did I fight? That's obviously because I wouldn't have survived otherwise." Noel was trying to kill her? Well, taking into consideration everything he knew about the past, it made sense. Had he been in Noel's position, he would have done the same. Perhaps he fought because he had to. For his freedom. The only reason I survived was because of Noel. He's the one who saved me, hence why I'm doing him this favor. I wouldn't have done so if it weren't for him." Lazarus's mind paused for a moment. Noel saved her? Then, it wasn't him that she was fighting? Haha, based on your reaction, it doesn't seem like Noel told you anything. Her back was turned, yet she seemed to sense every one of his reactions as if watching him through some invisible mirror. "The stories beneath are mere lies and speculations. Noel and I were never fighting. If anything, he was helping me." Her voice grew a little dim from that moment. "Even though he didn't have to, after all the things that we had done to him, he still decided to help me. I was blinded. Truly blinded." Her body stirred slightly, emotions started to well up deep within her body as for the first time she turned her head. Lazarus stood still, feeling a certain pressure coming from her as she slowly turned her head. And then, their eyes met. Or more like his eyes met her face. She didn't have any eyes? In their place burned two steady, unblinking flames. But beneath those flames, Lazarus could see a certain emptiness. He knew then that they were merely placeholders for what wasn't there anymore. "I paid a heavy price in the battle. I lost my eyes and with them my connection to the source. But in that darkness my mind became clear. I finally saw the truth of what I'd done." She gave a faint sorrowful smile as she brought her hand to her face. The flames in her eyes flickered. "Maybe this was the price I had to pay, to atone. A way to show how blind I once was." Lazarus stared at her eyes without making a face. It wasn't because he didn't want to, but because his entire body was frozen in place, unable to move at all. Just staring into her eyes made him feel completely and utterly helpless. If this was how strong a crippled god was, just how powerful was a full god? Eventually she closed her eyes and the pressure alleviated. When Lazarus came to, the goddess had already turned her head away. "How much do you know about what happened to us?" "About the past?" Lazarus opened his mouth but soon closed it. He didn't really know much. Just a meteorite fell and people gained powers. Then the world started to crack and the mirror dimension formed. PFTT. A small laugh escaped the goddess's lips. This prompted Lazarus to frown. Was he wrong? But how could that be? He had seen the recollection of what had happened back in the time he had been at the Kasha. Could it be that it was a lie? Don't get me wrong. You're not necessarily wrong with what you've said, but you're also not quite correct. It really does seem like Noel hasn't told you anything. We weren't exactly in the best position to speak. I can see that. The goddess replied, her tone growing a little somber. While what you said is mostly correct, there are a few things that you were missing out on. No. It's more like you're missing out on the most important aspect of the entire ordeal. Which is, powers weren't the only things that came with the meteorite. What? Lazarus's expression changed upon hearing her words. His chest suddenly felt heavier and some of the things that didn't quite make sense before started to make sense. But at the same time, he was suddenly overcome with a certain sense of dread. Emmett was right all along. But we were too blinded by our lust for power, too consumed by the promise of immortality to see it. And when we finally did, it was already too late. He was gone. And we were She stopped. Just for a moment. It was that short and brief pause that created a subtle yet visible tension that made Lazarus unable to breathe. The mirror dimension didn't form because of the meteorite. Her voice softly drifted throughout the room. Quiet and almost in a whisper. The mirror dimension was never supposed to be a thing to begin with. The only reason why it is even here is because we grew too strong. The mirror dimension was formed to trap us. To seal all of us. The goddess paused again, her voice straining. The mirror dimension is our prison. A construct forged by the outer beings to seal us in and never let us out. Chapter 660, Panthea 2. Listening to the goddess's words, Lazarus's mind went completely blank. It wasn't that he had a hard time processing her words, but it was more like he had a hard time accepting them. There's being strong enough to create a separate dimension and seal every single human in it? For them to be so capable. Just how strong were they? He managed to gain his answer a few moments later. Their strength is nothing to scoff at. It took the combined effort of Noel and me to beat one of the outer beings. We don't know just how many of them there are, but they are all incredibly powerful and mysterious. The goddess's voice was smooth as she spoke, narrating everything that she knew about the outer beings. It wasn't so much that they were much stronger than us, but it was more like their connection to the source. It was much deeper and profound than our own. It is by a miracle that we were able to win. Lazarus listened quietly, trying his best to keep up. However, the more he heard, the more shocked he was. Their connection was more profound? He had seen firsthand how powerful the source was. For their connection to be so deep. Just how strong were they? Not only that, he started to understand something else too. Was the reason you were sealed because of your connection with the source? Yes, it was. They deemed us to be too dangerous in existence. The goddess's voice grew lighter. Almost in a self-deprecating way. No, it was more like they deemed the 7 of us far too dangerous in existence. They created this entire dimension to keep us in check. Then what about the world outside? There are humans too. Was it not some sort of alternate planet? If so, that is also Earth. The goddess replied in a low tone. The world outside is merely the Earth after our imprisonment. If not for Torin finding a breakthrough and managing to shatter the dimension, the two worlds would have never come in contact with one another. But in the end, even when he managed to shatter the dimension, we were still unable to leave. The goddess slowly lowered her head to stare at her hands. The world outside has become a kind of poison to us. We can still go there in artificial bodies, but it's not the same. The sense of freedom, the open blue sky, the warmth of the sun, the freshness of the air, we can barely feel any of it through our clones. With a subtle trembling of her hand, the goddess clenched it into a fist. That is why Torin is so desperate. He wants to be free from this prison. This is why he's trying to control the outer world. What do you mean by that? Lazarus narrowed his eyes. He was aware of the fact that Torin and Sithris were one of the same. However, the one thing he had never understood was the motivations behind Sithris's actions. For a being so strong. Why did he never forcefully control the outer world? Why did he try to control it secretly? It made no sense. Do you know how we deepen our connection with the source? The goddess asked her question, catching Lazarus off guard. You can deepen your connection. No, thinking about it, he certainly felt like he could deepen his connection with the source. He just had to enter the same state as he did in the past. If he could, then. Faith. The goddess replied, her tone even. That is how we deepen our connection with the source. Faith. Lazarus opened his mouth, but the words he was about to say never left his mouth. All of a sudden, a lot of things started to make sense in his mind. The reason why there were so many churches. The reasons why these so-called regular people decided to call themselves gods. This was all to raise their faith. The more we are worshipped, the deeper our connection with the source becomes. It is by such means that we were able to put up a fight against the outer beings. It is also the reason why Torin never forcefully took the outer world by force. One cannot artificially create faith by force. It must come naturally. Taking in the words, Lazarus took a deep breath. Yet again, one of the answers to his questions had been answered. It all suddenly started to make sense. The reason he had been able to feel the source in the past. It was all because of the faith he had managed to acquire as Aurelius. But even faith has its limits. The goddess shook her head, her closed fist slowly relaxing and opening up again. Faith may draw us closer to the source, but it won't change the most important fact. The source does not accept us. It rejects us. The more powerful we became, the more insane we become. In some way, losing connection with the source has allowed me to see things clearly once more. Lowering her head, the goddess's voice similarly lowered. It is also the clarity that made me realize how wrong we were and how right he was. We should have listened, but we were all too blinded back then. Lazarus didn't need to ask to know whom she was referring to. It was Aurelius, or to be more precise, Emmett. He was the only one that could see through the madness, but at the same time he was also the first one to crumble under the madness. Though he could see through it, he wasn't immune to it. In fact, he had it the worst. Lazarus closed his eyes. Indeed, based on the memories he had seen and the conversation he had with the mirror, this was indeed the case. His death was most likely the turning point of everything. His death and actions were what drove Torin to the point of utter madness, resulting in the current version of him. A man blinded by both power and madness. Taking a deep breath, the goddess looked towards the city beneath. But even in his madness, he never lost sight of his goal. Of all of us left, he's the only one who hasn't given up. He's also the only one that is capable enough to contend with the outer beings. You can even say that the reason we still exist is because of him. There were hints of emotions in her voice as she spoke. Mostly her emotions seemed complex. On one hand, she didn't appear to approve of what Torin was doing, but at the same time Lazarus could almost pick up hints of sadness in her voice. In his own twisted way, he's the only one who is trying to save what remains of this world. He's also the only one capable of doing so. He's the only one capable of doing so? Indeed. The goddess nodded. He's found a way to connect directly with the source without any sense of disconnect and rejection. He's also not far from reaching the goal. So long as he manages to master the power and become the 8th god, then we might just be able to be freed from this prison. Hearing the goddess's words, Lazarus took a deep breath. These were the same exact words he had heard from Noelle. Just like he said. The key to it all was emotive magic. But there was only one thing that she got wrong. Torin or Sithris. He wasn't the only one with the power to become the 8th god. He could do so as well. Lazarus believed that he could achieve the same thing. He just needed time. So long as he had more time, he felt that it was possible. Still, Lazarus set all those thoughts aside and focused his attention on something else. He wanted to know more about the outer beings. If Torin were to become the 8th god, would he be able to beat these outer beings? I wonder. The goddess blankly stared towards the city beneath. I'd like to believe it's possible. Noelle and I proved that it is possible to beat the outer beings. It's possible, but the price we needed to pay was far too high. However, if someone were to fully tap into the source, then... The goddess didn't finish her words, but the meaning behind them was clear. Lazarus could only quietly purse his lips while musing over the situation. So not even they know much about these outer beings. However, for them to be able to seal them, it should be enough proof of their strength. They can currently put up a fight against them, but they can hardly win. In that sense, the key to it all was the source. So long as they could tap into the source, they felt confident in fighting against them. There was also another thought that occurred to Lazarus. You said that you managed to defeat one of the outer beings. Where's their body? Their body. The goddess paused for a moment before lowering her head. Torin took the body. Torin? Why did he? He said that he wanted to experiment with it. He wanted to see if he could tap into their powers. He did? And? Lazarus licked his lips, feeling a certain weight forming in his chest. What were the results of his experiment? A failure. The goddess replied. He's tried everything. From implanting organs into other people's bodies to trying to replace their blood with that of an outer being. In the end, most of them died without being able to tell the next day. The power isn't something most can wield. It's a power that seems to come straight from the abyss itself. A darkness that can't be tamed. But, pausing, the goddess grew hesitant. This aroused Lazarus's curiosity. But, I did hear about one of the experiments working somewhat. Although only somewhat. What? Lazarus paused. It had actually worked? Even partial, the fact that he somehow managed to make it work left Lazarus at a loss for words. How did he manage to do it? And who? But like I said, it only partially worked. Last I heard, the experiment was somewhat of a failure. Then again, the subject did end up becoming extremely strong at a young age. It's just that they don't seem to have any affinity with the source. The goddess shook her head. In the end, Sithris left his puppet Dawn to keep an eye on the subject. He's long given up on her. Lazarus's entire body froze in that moment. Thinking about the goddess's words and connecting all the bits and pieces together, a thought occurred to him and his usually calm expression started to falter. Given up on her. Dawn to keep an eye on the subject. A darkness that can't be tamed. Becoming extremely strong at a young age. Lazarus felt the very air get stripped out of his lungs as a certain image appeared in his mind. It couldn't be her, right? Chapter 661, Panthea 3. It was her, wasn't it? The possibility became more and more concrete in his mind the more he thought about it. Although Lazarus was shocked at first, he soon calmed down. His heart, which had previously skipped a beat, settled down rather calmly. What replaced it was a certain indifference. Wouldn't you say that since she's become strong it wasn't a failure? If it was really her, then the experiment wasn't necessarily a failure. That failure she was talking about was very close to reaching the zenith. No, it can still be considered a failure. Despite becoming strong, she's not going to solve the problem for us. She may eventually reach the zenith and be able to contend with them, but that isn't enough. We need to destroy them. And in order to do that, we need her to get in touch with the source. You did say that she's young. If you wait, we do not have much time left. The goddess replied, her tone lowering. Despite Torin's best attempts at keeping everything hidden, the outer being still sensed his actions. Although they have yet to make a move, it won't be long before they will. We simply cannot wait for her. Nor can we create another one. There's only so much that you can take from the body of an outer being. I see. Lazarus's face grew grim. The situation looked to be a lot more dire than expected. In that sense, he also understood why none of the other gods fought with each other. It wasn't because they got along well, but it was because they couldn't afford to. Or more like, some had given up all hope. The only one that was still struggling was Tauren. With just a simple conversation with the goddess, Lazarus was able to figure out a lot of the things he was unsure of. He had a few other questions he wanted to ask, such as why he had to collect all 4 relics and what would happen once he did, but before he could even ask these questions, the goddess tilted her head. "I sense a strange marking within you." She paused then. "You've been marked by the beast of the sea?" I managed to catch the surprise in her voice as she spoke. It was also then that I recalled my situation and quickly nodded. "I have." "Do you have a way to help me resolve this situation?" Since she was a goddess, Lazarus was sure that she'd have a way. Surely with her strength she could help him resolve this massive headache. "But I can't help you." The goddess simply shook her head. "I've told you before. I am no longer the same as I was before. I've lost connection with the source and I'm still dealing with the injuries from the fight. Even I am unsure of whether I'll be able to come out on top against that beast." Ah. Although Lazarus was aware of her injury, he didn't think it'd be this bad. "But what about your people? Whether they can handle that beast or not is irrelevant. My help only extends to what I've promised Noel. If you wish to collect the eye, you must go to the Eclipsed Maw in order to collect it. We'll have some people escort you there so that there will be no troubles." Lazarus got the message. He understood that the goddess wasn't willing to help him. He never intended to beg her for it anyway. Still, he planned on at least getting more information on the great primordial one. He was just about to ask when the goddess cut him off. "Do not worry too much about the beast. Once you collect the eye, you will be able to handle it." "I will?" Lazarus was surprised. "Was the eye that powerful?" "You're overthinking things. While the eye might be able to help you against the beast, in no way will you be able to beat it. You're far too weak for that." The goddess giggled. "I can see that you're quite young and quite powerful for someone your age, but you've still got ways before becoming truly strong. Perhaps with Noel's help you'll eventually become strong enough to contend against the outer beings, who knows? I'm sure Noel won't help just anyone." Suddenly waving her hand, the room started to twist and bend in unnatural ways. Startled, Lazarus looked around as a blinding light pierced his vision. At the same time, the goddess's voice continued to echo in his ear. "I've already said my piece. For now it'll be up to you to handle everything else. I wish you the best of luck in your journey and perhaps we might meet again." By the time Lazarus snapped out of it, he found himself back in the same room as before. The only difference: the goddess was no longer present in the room. Looking around, Lazarus tried to look for her, but she was completely gone. As though she had never been there to begin with. "And then, looks like your meeting with her was over." A warm voice greeted Lazarus from behind as he slowly turned his head to see the living saint standing by the entrance of the room, his smile warm. "Allow me to escort you back down." Lazarus opened his mouth but eventually closed it. He still had so many questions to ask, but he knew that he wouldn't get answers to them. The goddess had already explained to him the most important things. For now he planned on digesting all of the information while finding the eye. He was sure he'd get most of his answers once he collected the eye. As such. "All right." Lowering his head, he followed the living saint from behind. "May the goddess bless me with an undying light. Oh goddess, hear my plea. I wish for your eternal health. Thank you. Truly thank you." The entrance of the cathedral was crowded with people, all standing outside with their hands clasped in prayer, their voices rising together in unison. Arriving at the cathedral, Inaz and were met with such a spectacle, preventing them from moving any further. What in the world is going on? This is the first time I'm seeing something like this happen. Both Inaz and were stunned. However, Anne was the most stunned, as this was the first time she had ever seen something like this occur in the many years that she had frequented the Remnant South. This sight felt odd, and in some way it also felt disturbing to her. Just how many people did this goddess brainwash? And didn't believe in the gods for a single second. How could she, when she had to claw herself out of the gutter she used to live in? The only one to have ever helped her was herself. To her, the gods were nothing more than powerful beings on a self-indulgent power trip, intent on manipulating people into worshipping them. They cared for no one but themselves. Pathetic fools. And shook her head while looking at all the people on their knees looking at the cathedral with reverence. If you want help, you should help yourself, not ask someone else for it. Anne's gaze eventually fell on Inaz. Right? He was also one of those foolish worshippers. But, contrary to her expectations, Inaz didn't show any signs of reverence like she had previously expected. He had a certain calmness in his eyes as he looked at the distant building, which almost felt like she was looking at an entirely different person. The change was so glaring that she found herself asking, "Do you not feel something when seeing the cathedral?" "Oh, it's nice," Inaz answered while pulling his eyes away from the cathedral. "It's not nearly as impressive as I imagined it to be, but it's quite impressive." "Is that all that you're feeling?" "Pretty much," Inaz answered with a nod, his eyes wandering around. "More than that, we need to figure out where that merchant could have gone. I don't really have a good feeling about the situation." Inaz's words were cut off by a sudden commotion. As the two raised their heads, their eyes immediately fell towards the entrance of the cathedral, where two figures appeared. Immediately their eyes widened as the people on the ground prostrated themselves further. "Love live the goddess. Love live the saint. Love live light." A thunderous chant echoed through the air as the two figures emerged, one blazing like the sun itself and the other, the all too familiar merchant. This. And as his eyes shook at the sight of the figure next to the merchant, he couldn't help his reaction at all. That figure, it was a figure he could never forget even if he tried, and his body started to tremble. "You okay?" And seemed to notice his actions, her gaze falling on Inez. However, she couldn't quite tell the reason for his actions. Eventually, however, she settled her gaze on the blazing figure and started to connect the two. So it wasn't that he didn't care. He still does care. Similarly, spotting them, Lazarus turned his attention towards them as the two eventually moved to where they were. "You guys are here?" "You were late," and replied, her gaze falling on the living saint. Though he was smiling and he looked friendly, she could feel a certain pressure coming from him. It made her extremely wary. Thankfully, he didn't seem to care much about her as his gaze fell on Inez. His head cocked for a moment. "I feel like I've seen you before." And as his body shook. "He remembers me?" Though he was trying his best to remain calm, he was struggling to do so. This person before him was the same one who had changed his life. He was the same person who had given him hope and turned him into a follower of the goddess. He. So strange. The saint covered his mouth, his brows furrowing slightly. "I'm usually good at remembering stuff, but for some reason, even though I know that I know you, I don't quite recall." "How odd." The faces of Inez and Lazarus changed almost at the same time as they all looked down. It was in that moment that they realized. Their shadows. It was gone. This could only mean one thing. The forgetting. It was starting. Chapter 662, Eclipsed Maw 1. Virathanash. By now everyone had already acclimated themselves to the city. From its layout to its language and everything else that there was to know about the city. However, if there was one thing that interested most of them, it was a certain figure. The merchant. He was an extremely enigmatic figure who appeared out of nowhere and left a storm in his wake. From fighting against a luminarch single-handedly to providing goods that didn't appear to belong to the mirror dimension. "Wait, guys." Aoife appeared holding onto a certain cloth. Turning her head to look at the others, her expression turned strange. "I don't see any branding in this, but touch this. Doesn't this feel a little familiar? Now that you mention it." "It is." Touching the fabric, the others all shared the same opinion. This cloth, it was completely different from any of the cloths provided by the people of the city. "Where did you find this? It must have cost you quite a lot to buy this. I don't think you can get this quality of cloth around here." "You're right." Aoife nodded, putting the cloth away. "It wouldn't make sense for this type of quality of cloth to appear here. I've analyzed their other cloths and even their highest quality ones aren't as good as this one." "Really?" Kira eyes the cloth in Aoife's hand. "To me it just looks like some regular cloth." "No shit, princess." Aoife rolled her eyes, prompting Kira to raise her brow. "Weren't you the princess?" Ignoring Kira's comment, Aoife continued, "This would be considered regular where we come from, but here. This is anything but normal. It's no wonder they sold like crazy not too long ago. The prices weren't even that expensive from what I'm hearing." "What?" Amel was the one to speak this time, taking the cloth and feeling it with his hand. "Sheep? This? MHM. Aoife nodded, her eyes narrowing. "That's not the only thing that I managed to find." Aoife began pulling out all kinds of items. Ceramic plates, familiar foods, even bits of jewelry. None of them had any labels or branding, but it was obvious to by now they'd have to be stupid not to get the hint, as Leon's expression grew grimmer and grimmer with each passing second. Unlike the others, he had remained quiet the entire time. It wasn't that he didn't have anything to say, but it was more that he already knew everything. "This?" Amel looked at all the goods in Aoife's hands before looking at her. "Are you suggesting that the empires are?" "No." Aoife cut Amel off before he could go on a tangent. "I've already asked everyone about the goods. They all came recently and..." Aoife paused, her eyes pausing on the others as they all started to understand. "The merchant. The goods came from the merchant." "Exactly." Aoife closed her eyes, her expression tensing up slightly. "Considering everything we've found, from the goods to the various items, it's safe to say that the merchant is someone who comes from the same place we do. But not only that. Taking into account everything that I've heard from the locals about his fight with the people from the church, he feels quite familiar. In fact, besides the fact that he used his sword, he almost feels like..." Aoife paused, her brows furrowing. "He almost feels like..." Aoife scratched her forehead, her lips opening and closing as she started to stutter. "He almost feels like... He almost feels like..." Eventually, after a while, she looked towards the others and scratched the back of her head. "Just give me a moment. I think I'm tired. For some reason I can't remember what I was trying to say." "No, I don't think it's just you." Kira mumbled, pinching her chin. "I feel like I was onto the same thing as you. However, I can't recall as well. It's strange." "Same." Evelyn muttered as she looked at Leon. "What about you? Got any clue?" "Clue?" Leon blinked his eyes, looking at Evelyn. What was she talking about? They were clearly talking about... Eh? Leon held his breath. What exactly were they talking about? Splash. The crimson water smashed against the bow of the ship, splitting apart as a massive white ship moved through the waters. "We've been instructed by the goddess to bring you to the Eclipse's Maw. Make yourself comfortable while we guide you there. We should be there soon. The current tide shouldn't be too bad, so this is the best time to make the trip." On top of the ship, the captain, an older man with a long white beard and thin body draped in white clothing, gave a brief overview of the situation to Lazarus and the others. Although Anne tried her best to stop herself from rolling her eyes, she still did. She wasn't used to having others guide her in a ship. This was her pride as captain. For whatever reason, following Lazarus's encounter with the saint, those from the faction of light started to treat them like special guests. This made both Anne and Inez incredibly surprised, but at the same time skeptical. Just who in the world was he? How did he manage to get those from the faction of light to help them? Did he really meet with the goddess? The more Anne thought about the merchant, the more mysterious he became in her eyes. Not only was he abnormally strong, but his connections were also a mystery to her. Maybe, just maybe, getting tangled up with him wasn't such a bad thing. With that being said, I wish we could have gone with my ship. This entire experience felt odd to her. She wasn't used to being a crew member, and although she understood that going with her ship wouldn't be as good as going with their ship, not only did they not have to be afraid of any of the Seven Lords, but the ship was also larger and more equipped than hers. To go to such a dangerous place as the Maw, going with their ship was ideal. The only issue was that she didn't know or trust anyone on board. What if they decided to suddenly leave them stranded? What then? It was for that reason that Anne decided to have her ship follow from behind secretly. This was just in case something happened. Within the mirror dimension, you couldn't really trust anyone. You're weak. Lazarus didn't really expect to hear such words from the saint as he stood by the bow of the ship overlooking the sea in the distance. Slowly turning his head to look at the saint, he cocked his head. He was confused. Yes. The saint merely smiled while looking at Lazarus. Don't take my words as an insult. I'm only stating an objective fact. I was just curious as to how someone like you managed to gain the attention of the goddess. Lazarus wasn't offended by the saint's words. He didn't particularly care, in fact. He was just confused. Especially since he wasn't actually weak. He was in fact tier 6, halfway to tier 7. This meant that he was close to reaching the destroyer rank in terms of monster rankings. The only reason he wasn't stronger was simply because he was young. Noel's skill had changed his entire bone structure and appearance, hence why he looked a little over 30 years of age. Perhaps he even looked to be in his 40s. To be at his rank at such an age was quite an impressive feat, but usually it also meant that he had exhausted his potential. The more one progressed, the harder it was to reach the next level. In the saint's eyes, he probably looked like someone who was close to reaching his limits. Then again, in the first place, the number of people that reached the monarch rank was abysmal, let alone the zenith. This level was already quite good. You can say that she wasn't interested in me, but more interested in an acquaintance of mine. Oh? The saint looked interested but didn't ask any more than that. He seemed to be aware that this wasn't something he could pry on. Not that Lazarus had any plans on telling him in the first place. Mortem's location was still unknown and he couldn't afford to expose his existence. After all, Sithris's existence weighed heavily on their minds. While I don't know what you're planning on doing at the Eclipses, Maw, the reason why I'm asking about your strength is because at your current strength you'll struggle quite a bit in there. Lazarus's ears perked up. He didn't actually know much about the Maw. All he knew was how it was created and that the eye was located there. There are quite a few things that you'd need to worry about when going there. Although the place is a treasure heaven for those seeking the bones of monsters, it is also quite heavily controlled by the pirates who are trying to monopolize the monsters. Right, this was also something Lazarus had heard from Anne before. You don't have to worry too much about those pirates. With us here, they won't do anything. The monsters are also not a problem. The main issue is the current and the splits. I would like to explain to you what they are, but I'm sure you'll figure it out in a bit. Not even a few seconds after his words fell, a loud shout echoed throughout the ship. We're about to reach the Maw. Everyone get ready. Lazarus's eyes narrowed as he looked into the distance. That was where he heard the muffled sound of water falling? Water falling. His expression changed, and it wasn't long after until his eyes caught sight of a gaping hole in the sea, defying gravity as the water plunged in a constant thunderous fall that echoed across the waves. The Maw's edges were jagged and blackened as if scorched by some sort of black flame that burned within the water. The water spiraled as it descended, vanishing into a depth he couldn't begin to gauge. The ship slowed and stopped at a cautious distance, the anchor splashing down moments later. Throw the anchor. Splash. As the vessel settled, the saint turned to Lazarus, a faint knowing smile crossing his face. Looks like we're here. Welcome to the Maw. Chapter 663, Eclipsed Maw 2. A single figure stood on top of a tall cliff overlooking the distant crimson sea as her black hair fluttered in the air. He must be the merchant. Delilah's soft voice drifted through the air as her sharp black eyes shifted from the sea to the distant city. The dark marble shimmered under the pale sunlight, reflecting the growing crowd as more people emerged from their homes, filling the once empty streets. It was a beautiful sight, one that Delilah found herself admiring often. But at the same time, I'd like to sightsee with. Delilah pursed her lips while closing her eyes. Having spent the past couple of days there, she managed to figure out just as much as the others did. Putting the two and two together, she felt almost certain of the identity of the merchant. He was none other than the person that she was looking for. Standing in silence, Delilah's fists slowly clenched as she once again focused her attention on the distant sea. Remnant South. That was where the merchant was supposedly headed. She wanted to cross the waters and go to him, but she couldn't. The presence that stood in the middle of the sea wasn't something she felt like she could handle without putting up a massive struggle. Although she felt somewhat confident in defeating it, she still didn't want to take the risk. The fight might provoke even greater creatures that lurked within the mirror dimension. Although Delilah knew she was strong, she also knew that she was far from invincible. All sorts of people and monsters lurked in the deepest corners of both worlds. Not only that, but she wasn't alone. She had the cadets from the academy to take care of. While she was comfortable bringing them here, she only did so because she was aware of just how strong she was. What was there to fear when she was present? Her strength was what gave her the confidence to bring them. But this time things were different. The creature was very strong. She didn't know whether it was worth taking the risk. Delilah was about to fade from the spot when her head suddenly flicked towards a certain direction and her eyes narrowed. She felt a sudden movement coming from the monster. It had started to move. Although she couldn't tell where it was going, she saw a small and narrow gap that she could exploit without alerting it. Delilah didn't waste a single second and located all of the cadets. She was just about to move to them when she paused. For the briefest of moments, her brain lagged as she found herself questioning why she was doing what she was doing. However, that merely lasted a couple of seconds before she snapped out of it and faded from the spot. Merchant. Right, she was going to the remnant south to look for the merchant. But what was his name again? That's deep. Lazarus stared at the gaping hole that seemed to defy all sorts of laws of gravity as his expression turned grave. The muffled sound of water pouring into the pit only deepened the sense of dread, each splash echoing loudly in his ears. Here. The saint appeared next to Lazarus, holding onto what appeared to be a harness. In case something happens, we'll be able to pull you out with this. He proceeded to point at his waist. You put it directly from your waist and then your upper body. If something happens, we'll act immediately. Oh. Lazarus grabbed onto the harness and inspected it. At first glance, it looked just like a regular harness. It didn't even look to be very durable. A long wire was attached to it as Lazarus carefully inspected it. This one feels a bit more durable, but even so, don't worry about it. It's a very special relic. The living saint said, seeing the doubt in Lazarus's face. In the end, Lazarus put the harness on before hooking the wire behind him. Then turning his head, he looked towards Anaz and En. You are going to be fine by yourself? I am. Lazarus replied while looking at En. This mission was something that he was supposed to handle by himself. There was no need for En and Anaz to come, not that they wanted to go in the first place. The maw was extremely dangerous. While En's help would indeed be useful, taking into consideration that this had something to do with his past, Lazarus thought it was best if he went by himself. He couldn't have his secret exposed. Especially not when it involved his and Noelle's safety. Well, sure. And dismissed with her hand, looking at the distant maw with a frown. I did teach you everything that you need in order to survive. I think you'll be fine. Thanks. Lazarus then turned to Anaz, who looked back at him with a frown. Eventually he sighed. I actually think it's best if I go with you. What? Both En and Lazarus looked at Anaz in confusion. Was this the same Anaz they knew? Did he actually? Don't get me wrong. I don't want to go. Anaz dismissively waved at them. The only reason why I believe it's best to go is because of the primordial one. His tone lowered as he looked around. What if everyone suddenly forgets about us? What would we do then? I don't think I can. Don't worry about that. The goddess has already given me a rundown on your situation. The saint chuckled, taking out a small notebook from his pocket. I've already thought things through. In case I do forget, you can tell me to check my notebook. Ah. Anaz's face relaxed after seeing the notebook in the saint's hands. If you put it that way, then I have nothing else to say. He stepped back while keeping his eyes on the saint. His expression didn't show much, but Lazarus could see the subtle sparkle in his eyes. He shook his head. Looks like he still somewhat idolizes the saint. Eventually checking everything, Lazarus stepped onto the top of the handrail and looked down. The water was calm and he couldn't sense any monster beneath him. It was all clear from this point. You can go ahead. There are no monsters or pirates. Everything is clear. Hearing the saint's voice, Lazarus took a deep breath. Looking back for the last time, he stepped forward and fell down towards the water surface. Faint ripples formed under his feet as he gracefully landed right above the surface before he rushed towards the distant maw. Rua. A thunderous roar of crashing water grew louder as he neared the maw, crimson spray bursting into the air with every powerful cascade. Eventually stopping by the edge of the maw, Lazarus looked down, his calm gaze focused on the deep pitch of black that met his gaze. Despite how hard he tried, he couldn't feel anything beneath and his stomach churned with unease. However, he was ready. Slightly turning his head, a cat appeared on his right, while on his left was an owl alongside a crab as it raised its claws before speaking. I've set up a connection. I can tell. Lazarus closed his eyes and felt a certain red not far from here. In case something turned sour, he hoped he could transfer his body to the connection. Whether it worked or not, he wasn't sure, however it was worth a try. Opening his eyes again, Lazarus looked towards the crab. Are you okay with following me? The crab didn't have to follow him into the maw. Their transaction had somewhat ended the moment they had arrived at the remnant south. If it wanted to leave, it could. Lazarus didn't plan on forcing it to stay with him. Eventually, however, the crab shook its claw. Don't get me wrong, human. It is more about helping myself than anything else. Didn't you say yourself that this is the way to get rid of the primordial one's influence? It is. Then I must help. You aren't the only one who has been targeted by the great primordial one. I am also one of its targets. Helping you is the same as helping myself. Right? Lazarus was already aware of this. He had just asked in order to make sure. Seeing that nobody had any objection looking at the ship one last time, Lazarus took a step forward and his body plunged into the depths of the maw, his world turning dark at the same time. Roar. Immediately after jumping down, Lazarus felt a wave of cold air brush over his entire body as his hair and clothes started to flutter intensely, the darkness beneath him growing more and more intense. Closing his eyes, Lazarus imagined an azure orb and his entire body started to become lighter, his fall slowing down at the same time. Like that, he started to slow down mid-fall as the darkness around him persisted. Lazarus didn't know how long he continued to fall, but eventually the sound of water falling became even more pronounced. It now thundered so loudly in his ears that it started to feel uncomfortable. Boom. Boom. It almost felt as though thunder was striking against the maw each second. Eventually, however, Lazarus managed to reach the bottom of the maw as his feet touched the surface of the water. Even so, he still couldn't see. In the end, flicking his hand, a coral appeared as it started to pulse a dim red light. It was also in that moment that he finally caught sight of the water beneath him as his breath paused. He had a hard time describing what he was seeing. However, looking down, it looked like the water surface was fragmented into many pieces. Sort of like shattered glass, and looking closely, Lazarus felt like he could see images and recordings. Yes, recordings. Recordings of what appeared to have been a massive and grueling fight. And as he slowly turned his head to stare at a specific fragment, his face paused. That was without a doubt Noel. Chapter 664, Eclipsed Maw 3. What sort of? Lazarus narrowed his eyes at the shattered water before him. It lay in fragments like a broken mirror, splintered into thousands of shards, each reflecting his image from a different angle. From within the fragments, Lazarus saw several dozen scenes until his eyes focused on a certain fragment where he saw a certain silhouette. At first he was lost, but getting a better look, he recognized the silhouette. It was that of Noel. Though his back was turned his way, Lazarus was certain that the figure within the fragment was Noel. He stood above the crimson sea, his entire presence seemingly warping the space around him as another figure stood next to him. She was radiant. Just the mere sight of her made Lazarus want to look away. She felt too bright, almost as if he were staring at the sun itself. The two stood floating on top of the crimson sea, staring in a particular direction. Lazarus couldn't tell what they were looking at. From the fragment in front of them, there didn't appear to be anyone or anything in front of them. Is this it? The fragment remained like that. It merely displayed the two of them standing on top of the water ripples forming beneath them. Lazarus scanned his surroundings, his eyes falling towards the other fragments. He could see all sorts of images within the fragments. From the calm waters to several monsters jumping out of them and eating whatever came their way. It also displayed several boats passing by. In general, a lot of useless stuff. If my guess isn't wrong, it's displaying everything that had happened during the time before the maw formed. These fragments beneath, they were all records of the past. In that case, Lazarus was certain that if he looked hard enough, he'd find a fragment that would allow him to get a better idea of what happened and about the eye. The eye did get lost during the fight, so if I look hard enough, I might be able to find something. Lazarus felt that his plan was solid, but he quickly came to realize just how wrong he had been. An hour passed before he knew it. In that hour, he wasn't able to find a single thing. All he saw were the same boring and mundane scenes. From the calm waters to the monsters and boats. There was nothing that could help him at all. This is harder than I thought. He looked around, staring at the owl in the distance alongside the cat and the crab. At some point, he had also asked them to help him find anything. The fact that the efforts of the four of them combined still didn't produce any result displayed just how difficult it was to find what he wanted. There were simply way too many of them. Not only that, but the darkness also made it hard to look further ahead. Thankfully, Wobbles was able to produce enough light for them to see around, and it wasn't long before someone finally saw something. I found something. The first one to find something was surprisingly Pebble, who looked rather smug as Lazarus moved in his direction. Here. Pebble tapped its paw over the water surface, and Lazarus carefully looked in the direction of its paw, where he finally caught a glimpse of another scene regarding the fight that had happened between the two gods and the outer being. What? But as he looked into the fragment, Lazarus was completely taken aback. Not because of how intense the battle looked, but because... Where's the outer being? I can't see anything. Noel and the Panthea both appeared to be fighting the air before them. Lazarus couldn't see the outer being at all. It was as if its entire presence was erased from the fragments. Explosions occurred and blood spilled onto the sea. The fight looked incredibly intense, but at the same time it was incredibly hard to keep up with it. Not only was the scale of their attacks massive, but they were all incredibly fast. The fact that they both appeared to be fighting the air didn't add to the situation. It made it incredibly hard to keep up with the fight. But then, on careful observation, Lazarus realized something. Shadow. I can see a shadow. Indeed, looking at the surface of the Crimson Sea, he caught sight of a massive shadow. Lazarus's expression changed at the sight as he caught sight of the shadow. Not because the figure looked scary or anything like that, but because the shadow was blurred. It looked exactly like the blurred figure within the mural of the church. Could it be? Lazarus's mind snapped a few seconds after as he saw a change occur in the fragment. As both Noel and Panthea combined forces, the thing that stood out the most to Lazarus was the long gold scepter that was on Panthea's hand, as a large eye appeared to be embedded on top, its pupil glinting under the white sun above. Lazarus felt his breath pause at the sight of the eye. Oracle Eye. He was almost certain that the eye on top of the specter was none other than the thing he was looking for, as Panthea raised the scepter and attacked the shadow. Her attacks were fierce and quick, unlike Noel, who was a little bit slower. Nonetheless, the two appeared to work well together, feeding off each other's strengths while covering each other's weaknesses. It wasn't long before they managed to inflict an injury on the shadow and black blood spilled onto the sea. It was the subsequent scene that left Lazarus wide-eyed. Right as the blood spilled onto the sea, rather than fading into it like Noel's and Panthea's blood, the blood appeared to expand within the water's surface, forming some sort of black ink coating that felt eerily similar to an oil spill. What's going on? Why is the blood expanding? The sight left Lazarus at a total loss, but before he could even figure out what was happening, the fragment stopped and the scenes reset to what they were at the start. Wait, that's it. He didn't see enough. He didn't even get to see the scepter of the goddess break. It was supposed to break in the fight. However, the scene where it occurred didn't appear. There must be more. Lazarus looked towards Almighty and the others, his mouth opening as he prepared to tell them to keep searching. However, right as his mouth opened, he noticed a subtle change coming from the water beneath him, and as he looked down, he saw several thousand sharp teeth appear beneath him, circling all over his body as a gaping black hole appeared in the middle of the teeth. His calm expression changed subtly as he pressed his foot onto the water surface. Step of suppression. Whatever was coming at him suddenly stopped moving as Lazarus looked down with a serious expression. Then, tapping his foot onto the ground again, the massive frame of a monster burst out from the water. Splash! Water splashed all over Lazarus as he looked up to see a gigantic shark-like monster, its presence seemingly towering over him by large amounts. It was towering, and Lazarus appeared insignificant at the sight of the monster. And yet, under Lazarus's cold gaze, the monster appeared completely helpless as it tried to thrash in the air. However, regardless of how much it tried to act Lazarus's control over it didn't falter in the least bit. Staring at the floating monster in front of him, Lazarus's lips curled slightly as Pebble appeared not long after. Finally, the little dragon set its eyes, falling on Lazarus. I can't believe it took you so long to finally gain this much control over the skill. You were seriously neglecting it. Ah, there it was. Pebble's nagging. Following the evolution of Veil of Deception to Lament of Lies, Pebble's jealousy knew no bounds. It nagged every day, telling him about how its skill was better and how he wasn't using it correctly. Lazarus never had time to properly master Step of Suppression due to all the things that he had to train, but following the past several months he took his time to properly train the skill, and now he had managed to gain good enough control over it. A new world opened up to him after that. Not only was he now capable of controlling the gravity of small radii and certain areas, but he could now also reverse it. In some way he could now use telekinesis. Although it wasn't as good, with more practice he could probably reach a level that was almost the same as it. The only issue with the skill was Pebble. It had become a little too smug about it. Kikik. Looking at the owl with a provocative look, Pebble crossed its paws. Lazarus shook his head before turning his attention towards the monster and summoning threads, directly killing it. Oh! Moments after killing it, Lazarus had originally planned on tossing the body away, but he was shocked to find a certain something within the body of the monster as he retrieved it. A bone? A terror-ranked bone? This is pretty good. No, this was in fact really good. Lazarus was well aware that he could sell this for good money. His mood immediately improved and he tossed the monster away before continuing his search for the right fragment again. He continued like this for the next several hours. From time to time monsters would appear and he would kill them each time. Everything looked and felt normal at first glance, but after a certain point Lazarus stopped. Lowering his head to look at the numerous bones in his hand, he paused. What sort of? He had a total of 15 bones in his hand, which was the same as the number of monsters he had killed. Each time he killed one, he found a bone within the body of the monster he killed. At first Lazarus thought it was luck. However, after the third time he realized that something was up. By the time he had collected 15, he was very well aware that something was up as he finally realized why so many pirates loved this place. This place. It was a massive treasure trove. With all monsters containing bones, how could it not be a treasure trove? It was no wonder that the Seven Lords wanted to monopolize this place. But how is it possible for the monsters to all have a bone? How does this make sense? Lazarus frowned thinking about the situation, but soon his brows rose. He suddenly realized something. This place isn't just a regular place. The blood of an outer being and two gods fell on this place. Could it be that this is the reason for the bones to be present in the bodies of all the monsters? Lazarus's heart skipped a beat. Lowering his head and retrieving a small egg from his ring, he licked his lips as he looked towards one of the corpses he had tossed away. A sudden thought occurred to him as he looked at Pebble, who also appeared to share the same thought as him. I think it might work. It's possible human. Lazarus licked his lips, staring at the egg once more and taking out a mirror. Maybe. Just maybe. He could finally get Pebble its own body. Chapter 665, Eclipsed Maw 4. Everyone paused whatever they were doing. With all eyes focused on the egg in Lazarus's hands, the surroundings turned quiet. The egg, it was something that he had almost completely forgotten about, but he did recall receiving the egg as some sort of reward. Lazarus found himself shifting his attention towards a distant creature he had killed. After a little bit of thought, he raised his hand and the creature's body moved towards him. It was a massive octopus-like creature, its body towering several times larger than Lazarus, who glanced at Pebble from the corner of his eye. Pebble. Yes. Without wasting a single second, the cat pressed its paw against the water surface and the octopus shriveled up into a tiny ball the size of a fist. Lazarus brought the egg right beneath the octopus as a black liquid began to seep out from the octopus's shriveled-up body, dropping onto the egg. Both Pebble and Lazarus waited with bated breath, their eyes on the egg as they waited for something to happen. And then, sizzle, sizzle. A faint sizzling sound echoed in the air as the egg began to pulse. Pebble's face changed subtly, and so did Lazarus's as the two looked at each other. Neither one needed to say anything. They understood exactly what they needed to do. The concentration is a little low, but if we collect just enough of them, we might be able to get a reaction. Coupled with the mirror and... Lazarus paused. He didn't want to jump ahead with conclusions, but staring at the egg and feeling the subtle pulse of life coming from it, he was aware that he was onto something. Pebble too, as its eyes sharpened. With just one look, Lazarus could tell how eager the cat was to get its own body. Having helped him for so long, Lazarus thought that this was the least he could do for the cat. Still, I can't lose sight of my goal. I need to keep searching for clues. I know I will find what I need if I look hard enough. And so the search resumed once more. There was no real change to their actions besides the fact that whenever Lazarus killed a monster, he'd use the blood and drip it onto the egg. With each monster they killed, the more the egg pulsed to life. They also encountered all sorts of monsters. Mainly terror ranks. Destroyer ranks didn't appear, mainly because they seemed to be aware of Lazarus's strength alongside the pressure coming from Almighty and Wobbles. The two of them were enough of a deterrent for most strong monsters. This kind of annoyed Lazarus, since he felt that the egg would progress faster with the blood of a Destroyer rank monster, but he knew this was merely arrogance from his side. Destroyer ranks monsters weren't ones he could simply fight and chop like some sort of vegetable. They were all extremely strong and cunning. This was merely wishful thinking from his side. I found something. Right then Lazarus was brought out of his thoughts as he heard Almighty's calm voice. Turning his attention towards the owl as its eyes glowed in the distance, Lazarus made his way towards it and looked down to see another fragment detailing the fight between Noel and the outer being. Yet again I can't see the outer being's figure. It was as if its entire presence wasn't allowed to be seen. As if the world had completely erased its existence. Even its shadow was blurry. Lazarus's brow rose when he stared at the fragment. This one was different from the other two. The fight looked to be nearing its end, with both sides looking extremely tired and injured. Not only that, but the landscape looked different too. He could see a gaping hole in place of where the Crimson Sea once stood. Noelle's body was entirely covered in blood, but it appeared to be slowly healing, while the goddess looked weak and fragile, still hanging on by a thread. But then, something happened. Out of nowhere, the shadow appeared right beneath the goddess's body as her entire body flared with light, but by the time she reacted, it was already too late, blood spurting out from her eyes. Though he couldn't hear anything, he could practically feel her scream from the fragment. Her body flared with more light as light exploded in all directions, sending the outer being scurrying back. That was when Noel made his move, fading away from where he was and appearing behind the shadow. Staring intently at Noel, Lazarus saw him pierce his hand towards the air. It looked like he was hitting nothing, but halfway through his motion his hand began to turn black as an inky black liquid began to spill all over his hand. In the shadow beneath, Lazarus saw Noel's hand pierce into the body of the blurred figure. The world came to a stop in that moment. And then, the body of the outer being slid down Noel's hand, falling into the gaping hole beneath, turning everything beneath black. It looks no different than how it looks now, from the hole that appeared to defy all laws of gravity and the darkness that enshrouded the place. Thinking about it, Eclipsed Maw really did seem like a fitting name for the place. Still, what about the scepter? Lazarus turned his attention towards the goddess, who looked extremely weak and frail. She looked to be on the verge of falling, her entire body pale. Lazarus stared at her and then at the scepter in her hand. He could see that it was cracked and on the verge of breaking. It was just like he had heard. But then, appearing next to her, Noel appeared to say something. Though she was blind, as though she was following his voice, she looked in his direction. Her face turned a little complex before she eventually nodded her head, and Noel eventually grabbed the scepter and tossed it into the maw. His face looked cold as he tossed the scepter. Lazarus watched as it faded into the darkness, his brows furrowing. So Noel tossed the scepter into the maw? But then, that doesn't help me out at all. I still have no clue as to how to find it. At least this was what Lazarus thought at first. But then, Lazarus suddenly saw Noel retrieve a certain mirror from out of nowhere and flip it over to the maw. A faint glow manifested before fading. The action was subtle and no real change appeared after this, but this was a massive clue. Does that mean that I have to use the mirror in order to find the eye? Lazarus was quick to take the mirror. At the same time, he started to think about everything he had seen. He suddenly started to understand why no one could find the scepter. It was probably because Noelle had used the mirror to hide it. Not only that, he also understood why the goddess never tried to look for it. Because she never planned on looking for it. From what he had seen, it looked like the two had made an agreement with regards to it. I guess it also kind of explains why those from the church don't know much about the fight and think that it was one between her and Noelle. It was most likely a rumor that she had spread herself. She wanted to keep her own members in the dark about the situation, keeping them away from the Maw. It also explains why the Maw is mostly controlled by pirates and not them. Pirates wouldn't care about what was on the fragments. They were all there to collect bones and make money. Her goal was to keep the incident a sort of secret from Cithras. The two had a sort of agreement to keep the eye away from Cithras. It all finally makes sense. Turning his attention around the place, Lazarus looked at the mirror in his hand. Staring at his own reflection within it, he closed his eyes and sighed. Things would have progressed much faster had you told me that this was all I needed to do. Thinking about all the time he had to waste looking for the clues regarding the Lazarus side. Had Noelle just told him about the situation beforehand, he would have been able to save a lot of time. Maybe there's a reason why he didn't want to tell me. Could it be that he wanted me to see the fragments? That could be it, really. It still annoyed Lazarus. He was going to see them regardless of whether he told him or not, but what else could he do? In the end, clicking his tongue, he flipped the mirror over and channeled his mana. A faint white glow enveloped the mirror shortly after as Lazarus panned its surface across his surroundings, his eyes falling on the mirror as he looked around. Nothing. Is this how it's supposed to work? Moving the mirror around, Lazarus was confused. He couldn't really see anything. Was he doing it correctly? Lazarus's brows knitted together tightly as he looked at the reflection. Regardless of where he pointed it, he didn't see a single thing. He even infused more of his mana into the mirror, but again, nothing. Am I mistaken? Did I do it wrongly or a? Lazarus's expression suddenly changed drastically as his head flicked in the opposite direction. Every hair on his body suddenly rose on end as his body started to stiffen. No shit, not yet. With his heart pressing tightly against his chest, Lazarus's eyes eventually fell on the gigantic eye that was staring back at him. A constant ringing sound suddenly echoed in his mind and he started to shiver. Slowly blinking his eyes, Lazarus felt an inexplicable change occur to him and his entire body. He couldn't quite describe what it was, but it was almost as if his very existence was slowly being erased from the world. His eyes shook. This was the last phase of the Great Primordial One's hunt. There was no more escaping for him. Chapter 666, Eclipsed Maw 5. Thud. A graceful figure appeared by the port of an enormous city, the large frames of the boats casting long shadows across the crimson water. Alongside her were several cadets as they all held onto their stomachs. Yuke. I feel like I'm going to die. You only just feel it? I am going to die. Let me help with that. Fuck off. Teleportation wasn't easy on the body. Delilah was fine because of her strength, but the others were far from okay. It took them a good couple of minutes to fully recover before they finally caught a glimpse of the massive city that stood before them. Leon looked at the place with a complicated expression. Who would have thought a city like this would exist within the mirror dimension? The buildings were tall, primarily white in color, adding a perfect contrast to the massive white sun that hung in the air. Further adding to that, in the distance he could see the massive frame of a cathedral standing imposingly at the heart of the city. Be it the architecture and the neatness of the place. Leon had a really hard time fully grasping the concept of what he was seeing. How come the Empires never mentioned something like this? It almost feels like they've kept it a secret on purpose. Leon wasn't the only one who thought this. The others also shared similar expressions and thoughts. Delilah was the only one who stared at the scene without much thought. The place was indeed impressive, but she cared nothing for it. She only had one goal, and that was to find out more about. Delilah paused, her brows slightly knitting together. Who was she looking for? What was she here for? Her thoughts were lost and her mind started to go blank each time she tried to think about it. What's going on? The situation felt eerie and strange. Delilah knew that she had arrived at this place for a reason. She was looking for someone. Something. But the moment she started thinking about the figure or object in question, her mind would go blank. She started finding it harder and harder for her to recall, and her lips pursed tightly. Is someone messing with my mind? Delilah felt that this was the closest thing to the truth, but at the same time she found the possibility hard to accept. Could there really be someone powerful enough to alter her memories? Delilah knew that there were more powerful figures than her in this world, but she didn't think there were figures strong enough to completely alter her memories like that. The fact that a creature or person was capable of pulling off something like this made her face tense slightly. This might be more serious than I expected. Still, with the situation like this, she found it hard to understand what to do. The only thing she knew was that she was looking for something or someone. That was the only thing that she knew, and that didn't really help her at all. Delilah's thoughts paused all of a sudden. Without even thinking, her head flicked towards a certain direction. She wasn't the only one to sense the sudden pulse of energy coming from the distance. Almost everyone within the city felt it. The hair on almost every single person rose as a terrifying and ancient pressure bore down on the world, causing the breaths of a few to quicken. There were even some that directly passed out on the floor, the emissaries of the church coming out as they started to scream towards the people in the streets. Everyone get back inside. Get back inside. The ships began to rock back and forth and a strong wind suddenly pulsed through the air causing waves to form. Bells rang and screams started to echo. Ah! Quickly go back in. In. In mere moments the calm city fell into panic and chaos ensued. Despite the emissaries' cries the panic continued, only growing more restless as the pressure coming from the distance intensified. Even Delilah found her face growing a little grim at the pressure that came from the distance. So it's that beast. She recognized the presence. It was the same presence that had made her so wary of crossing the sea. In the end the reason why I couldn't feel you is because you were here? Delilah's hands started to itch. Rather than being scared or panicky, she found herself growing a little restless. She wanted to test the monster. She wanted to see just how strong it was. Who between them was stronger? Of course these were merely passing thoughts. She had certain responsibilities and looking towards the cadets next to her she understood that she couldn't expose them to the danger in the distance. Looking around Delilah was about to send them away when Leon looked at her. Please. His voice was serious, his gaze fixed towards the distance. He was looking in that direction with a complicated expression. Pulling his gaze away and finally looking at her, Leon's voice softened slightly. I have a feeling that we're both looking for the same thing. Looking for the same thing? Delilah didn't answer but kept her gaze on Leon. I don't understand what is going on, but I can't remember what I was looking for. I think you're the same, right? He's also affected? Delilah's eyes narrowed further. However, before she could get a word out, Leon looked into the distance. My instincts are screaming at me right now. Leon's voice was soft, but there was a certain assurance to them that made Delilah pause. She was aware of Leon's innate skill. Having observed him for a while and after asking him directly, she knew exactly what the skill consisted of. In that case, I can feel it. Leon mumbled, his mouth dry as he looked towards the distance where the massive pressure was coming from. We'll find what we're looking for if we go there. The ice stood imposingly above the fractured water, its massive frame reflected within the fractures as though 1,000 eyes were all staring at Lazarus at the same time. Time appeared to stop in that moment. A suffocating pressure bore down on the world and Lazarus found himself stuck in the spot. Sweat trickled down the side of his face as he stared at the eye directly. I can't move, I can't move, I can't move. Lazarus wasn't one to panic easily. Even in front of the goddess he was able to maintain a certain calmness, but in front of the massive eye that stood before him Lazarus found himself panicking. He was helpless. He felt helpless. Regardless of how hard he tried to break free of the shackles of the eye, he couldn't move at all. It was as if he had lost complete control of his body, leaving behind only his mind. And then, thud. As ripples formed across the fragmented water surface, a figure appeared not far from where Lazarus was, his smile wide and eyes completely white, devoid of pupils. We meet again. We meet again. We meet again. His multi-layered voice echoed within the darkness, adding to the sense of eeriness of the situation and causing Lazarus to panic further. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Tapping onto his chest, Silas coughed a couple of times. Eventually opening his mouth again, he started speaking with his original voice. Ah, that's much better. He directly turned his attention towards Lazarus, his lips pulling further as he looked at him. You sure came a long way to get to the remnant south. I bet your journey was a lot smoother than you expected, right? Silas began to laugh. He had been present the entire time, watching over Lazarus and the others as they traversed the Crimson Sea to get to the remnant south. He was the main reason why their path was so unobstructed. He couldn't afford to let them die so easily. Not when he and the others were so necessary to him. Calmly taking steps towards where Lazarus was, Silas took a good look at him. Do you know how fascinated I was to see your emotive magic in action? You, heh. Silas covered his mouth while suppressing a chuckle. He could still distinctly recall the scene in which Lazarus fought against the Luminarch, beating him to submission with just his emotive magic. Shivers. That was what Silas felt in that moment. Shivers. I was aware from the very start that you were a powerful emotive mage. That was also one of the reasons why I chose you. Silas walked around the frozen Lazarus. Although it seemed like he was wasting time talking to Lazarus, in reality he was merely waiting for the primordial one to completely erase his existence from the world. It was a process that usually lasted a few minutes. Before then Silas couldn't touch him. But you see. Silas turned his attention towards Lazarus, pausing to meet his gaze. You far exceeded my expectations. Not only are you an extremely powerful emotive mage, but you're probably among the top in the entire world. Silas suddenly burst out laughing, his face unable to hide his joy. Finally he had found the missing ingredient to his ascension. Once the primordial one was done absorbing his existence, Silas planned on absorbing his emotive powers. He alongside and were the missing pieces that he was craving for. By the time he absorbed their powers, we'll finally be whole again. 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 Silas suddenly covered his mouth, his white eyes flickering. Eventually recollecting himself, he looked towards Lazarus. Sorry about that. It tends to happen when I'm excited. Chuckling, Silas looked around. Eventually his gaze fell on a certain object in Lazarus's hand and his brow rose. A mirror? Looking closely, the mirror had some intricate patterns that made it visually appealing. However, it didn't really seem like anything special. Why were you holding on to a mirror? I doubt you were checking yourself out in this place. Silas lowered his body to get a better look at the mirror. Although he couldn't feel a single thing from the mirror, he wasn't stupid enough to think it was just a regular mirror. It must be some sort of relic. Thinking about it, why was he here? Silas licked his lips thinking over the situation. The Eclipsed Maw was famous for its bones, as all the monsters within the premises seemed to magically contain bones. It was a treasure trove. Was he here for the monsters? No, I doubt he's here for the bones. I've seen him kill a few monsters, but that doesn't look to be his main goal. Then, what was his goal? Silas thought deeply and hard about the situation. Eventually, however, he recalled a certain something that he had stumbled across when he had visited the Cathedral of the Goddess, and his mouth slowly curled up. I see. He suddenly started to understand, his gaze looking at the mirror with even more interest as he slowly retrieved it for himself. Staring at his own reflection, Silas laughed. So this will help me find the goddess's scepter? He licked his lips, turning towards Lazarus, who stared at the mirror in his hands, his eyes shaking slightly. This was all Silas needed to see before smiling further. I guess I've got my answer. Chapter 667, Meeting Again, 1. We are very close. Don't lose focus. Do not lose sight of the goal. I have been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Soon we'll be whole. Several voices whispered in Silas's mind, his head coking left and right as his white eyes grew unfocused. He was used to the voices. Each voice represented a different part of him. Silas wasn't but one mere entity. He was the culmination of several entities all trapped within one body. One could even argue he was merely the prison holding onto the lingering spirits of the mirror dimension. But at the same time, with all the time that had passed, Silas started to develop his own personality. One that was more dominant and more conscious than the rest. He was starting to become his own person. But he wasn't quite there yet. He was still missing several things. Quickly! Don't waste this chance. We must hurry and not let it slip away. Thinking about his current situation, Silas's neck twitched slightly. The voices inside of him were growing excited. After all these years, freedom was finally within reach. They couldn't take it anymore. They had been patient enough, but it was time for them to finally get rid of the curse that was keeping them trapped within the body. Indeed, this was a curse. It was a terrifying curse that had plagued them since the dawn of the mirror dimension. But not for long. Soon all their struggle were going to pay off. And the half-key to solving it all was standing right before him, his body frozen in place as he held onto a mirror with intricate patterns. Well, let's see if it works. Silas didn't waste a second and grabbed the mirror from Lazarus's hand. Under Exe rules influence, Lazarus was completely helpless. His body was frozen in place, his mind the only thing that was properly functioning. This was the difference between a mere human and the great primordial one. He was no different than a small bug that could be squished as the primordial one wished. Am I supposed to inject my mana in this? Silas injected his mana into the mirror and waved it around the maw. However, he was left disappointed to see no reaction from the mirror. No, he did feel a reaction, but it was extremely small. In fact, the reaction almost felt repulsive. As though it was trying to reject him. This only made him smile. Don't worry. I won't be using you for long. Just help me find the scepter. He tried the same thing a couple of times, but yet again no reaction. Eventually he turned to look at Lazarus. How does this work? Got any idea? No words or reaction. Lazarus couldn't speak at all, and recalling his current predicament, Silas chuckled. Sorry for that. Though he apologized, his words felt more sarcastic than anything else. He turned the mirror toward himself, studying his reflection. No matter how he examined it, it looked like an ordinary mirror. Was that really all it was? Silas thought about it for a while before shaking his head. No, that reaction I got from him felt real. I don't think it was a lie. I just don't know how to use it. Well, I guess it doesn't matter. Though the scepter was tempting, it didn't really serve much purpose to him. While it was indeed the relic of a goddess, what Silas cared more about was achieving his goal of becoming whole. Only once he achieved his goal would he get rid of the voices and have his own identity. That was all he needed. All he wanted. He had to have it. Right now. He. They. Them. They had no identity. It was Silas, but at the same time wasn't. What could they even be considered? This needs to stop. I just want to be free again. Hurry. Hurry. Silas's head started to contort as the voices in its mind started to grow more restless. I get it. I get it. Silas bit his tongue and he felt a sharp pain invade his mind. The voices stopped then. But only for a little while. That hurt. It hurt a lot. Why did you do that? Why did you do that? Silas quickly increased his grip on the mirror before eventually lowering his hand. Almost. He just had to resist for a little bit longer. Slowly turning his head, Silas fixed his gaze on the primordial one. Staring at Exe Hurl, Silas raised his head to look up at the maw. From Exe Hurl's presence alone, he could feel several important figures had arrived to check out the situation. However, Silas wasn't worried. If they knew what was best for them, then the last thing they were going to do was come to where they were. And in case they did show up, a slow smirk began to form on his lips. It'll be a nice way to feed my new mind. It'll be a nice way to feed my new mind. It'll be a nice way to feed my new min. Silas's words came to an abrupt halt when he felt something warm in his hand. Surprised, he lowered his head to see that the heat was coming from the mirror. His brow rose up in surprise, but before he could even understand what was happening, a blinding light shot out from the mirror. Suddenly the darkness that embraced the surroundings faded for a brief moment as even Hurl was affected by the mirror. What? It was only for a mere second, but that was enough. By the time the light faded and everything returned to normal, he was shocked to see that Lazarus was no longer where he once was. Instead, in the exact spot where he should have been was a large statue. Silas stopped in that moment, his head shaking as he sighed. When will they learn? He lowered the mirror in his hands. There's no escaping. The eye behind him shook, closing as the world began to tremble. Rumble. Now you've gone and done it. Silas shook his head, a smile blooming across his face. You've angered the one thing that shouldn't have been angered. Rumble. Rumble. The changes were quite abrupt and unexpected. In one moment the area around the maw was calm, and in the next moment a terrifying and ancient energy began to sprout from deep within the maw, covering the surroundings. The boats docked outside of the maw began to rock back and forth while the faces of a few people paled considerably, some even passing out on the spot. Only a certain few were able to remain calm. Staring deep into the maw, the living saint's brows furrowed as he raised his hand and cast a large bright shield around the boat. The ship began to settle down almost immediately while the overwhelming pressure in the surroundings slowly began to ease. He did so much with such ease that it almost looked effortless. But was it really effortless? And turned her attention towards the living saint as he stood at the bow of the ship with his hands behind his back, his eyes fixed towards the maw in the distance. Although he was trying his best not to show it and could see the subtle trembling of his fingers. Just what in the world is happening? Her confusion merely lasted a few seconds. Thump. Right as the barrier formed around the ship, a figure appeared not far from where she was, his entire face pale. She didn't even have the time to be surprised or make a sound as she stopped the moment she saw how pale his face was. However, by the time she recovered, she saw him head directly from the living saint. Why? Why are you here? What happened down there? Why? The primordial one is here. Lazarus answered, his voice oddly calm despite the situation. We need to quickly leave the place. Even now he was trembling. Just one look at the primordial one was enough to completely freeze him in place and render him helpless. Thankfully he was aware of such a possibility occurring. It was for that reason that he had set up different statues. On any normal occasion he wouldn't have been able to escape, but thankfully he had the mirror with him. This was no regular relic. It was one of the 4 sacred relics. So when Silas touched it and attempted to wield its power, it instinctively tried to reject him. Not everyone could use the relics as they pleased. Even Lazarus was the same. There were specific requirements for one to use the relics. In Lazarus's case, he had a special identity that allowed him to use the mirror. The same couldn't be said for Silas. Aware of this, Lazarus took the chance to teleport back into the ship. Even so, he was well aware of the fact that he was far from free from the primordial one's clutches. In fact, this was merely the start. Swoosh! Suddenly massive boulders of water began to rise from the depths, breaking the surface of the water and producing several large crimson waves half the size of the ship's. A suffocating pressure washed over the area, its weight crushing down on everything around it. It was as though the air itself had thickened, pressing down on every chest, making each breath a struggle. Lazarus froze, his eyes locked on the unfolding chaos. From the heart of the maw, the gargantuan form of a monster began to rise, its enormous frame emerging slowly from the depths of the maw. What's happening? Be careful! As its massive body pulled free from the water, it sent shockwaves through the sea, creating monstrous waves that battered the ship with each passing second. What the hell is that? The sheer size of the creature was overwhelming, its silhouette barely discernible in the mist of rising water and darkened skies. The ship groaned under the pressure, causing several people to stumble over. Only a few were able to remain standing, and of those few none were able to formulate a single thought as they stared at the massive silhouette that loomed before them. The entire process took mere seconds. As its enormous frame emerged from the water, the waves that had surged through the area began to settle, fading almost as quickly as they had come. All noise ceased. Then, he's here. Nobody knew who it was, but the words echoed the thoughts of all those present. Hurl is here. For the first time in a very long time, the great primordial one had made its appearance. The moment it did, the remnant south shook. Chapter 668, Meeting Again 2. Chapter 668, Meeting Again 2. Lazarus suddenly thought of one of the quotes he had read in the book talking about Hurl. Perhaps the greatest mercy that this forsaken place has to offer is not what we see, but what we cannot. No, it's not that the truth is hidden. It's that our minds are simply incapable of comprehending its real form. We lack the capacity to perceive it as it truly is. And in that failure, I believe, lies the only mercy the mirror dimension offers. Lazarus had a hard time understanding the quote at first. Mercy? For what? For not being able to see Hurl's true form? What sort of mercy was that? It made no sense. It was stupid. And it was very likely the truth. Staring at the hulking mountain that stood before him, Lazarus finally started to believe in the quote. Even now he couldn't see the primordial one's true figure. Hurl hid behind a deep mist that hid its entire figure. However, deep within the mist one could see the blackened outline of its enormous frame as 2 glaring deep eyes shone from behind the mist, staring at all those beneath it. Quickly! Do not look. The saint's voice echoed the moment Xaherl's gaze fell on the people beneath, but by then it was already too late. Ah! Help! Screams tore through the surroundings as several of the emissaries grabbed onto their heads, veins pulsing down their necks as their eyes turned bloodshot. Ahi! The screams were heart-wrenching, to the point where it made Lazarus's blood curdle. Kill me! Please! Kill me! Ah! Splash! Splash! Of the many that were affected, several jumped out of the ship, swimming down the depths of the crimson waters without holding their breaths. They simply swam all the way down until they ran out of breath and drowned within the depths of the water. The few other ones that didn't choose to drown themselves ran towards the nearest walls and smashed their heads against them, causing blood to splatter all over the deck of the ship. Help me! Make it stop! Make it stop! Madness had overtaken the entire boat with just a simple gaze. Even Lazarus wasn't completely unharmed, his entire body turning pale as he stumbled to the ground and took deep and heavy breaths. His mind was pierced with a terrifying pain that made him want to end it all as images flashed across his mind. But thankfully he was still able to hold on. And that was thanks to none other than his high mental capacity. If not for that, he would have also met the same fate as the other people on board. Ah! As even more screams tore through the air, Lazarus slowly raised his head to stare at the distant saint. He also wasn't completely unaffected by Xaherl's presence, with his face slightly pale. He was still faring a lot better than most people. And As were also doing well, with neither one of them looking up. Already aware of the fact that they were being haunted by such a creature, they knew enough to know not to look up. This was what probably saved their lives. It was unfortunate that not many people were able to be like them. Before Lazarus knew it, almost 2/3 of the members of the entire ship had bashed their heads into the walls or jumped into the water. It was total chaos, and all it took was one gaze. One simple gaze. How in the world are we supposed to defeat that thing? Amidst the chaos, Lazarus heard Anaz's desperate voice, and he craned his neck to look at him. He was trembling and his face was pale. It was pretty obvious to Lazarus that Anaz was scared. But even in his fear, he didn't seem to have given up. He turned his attention towards him while talking. "Ddo, you have a way to solve this? I remember you said something about Silas. Did you find him? Did he come?" Even now he was trying to assess the situation. It was the only thing they could do at this very moment, as the primordial one's attention appeared to be fixed on the saint. Anaz's words were what Lazarus needed to hear in order to snap out of his state. "Yes, I can't let the fear take over me. I need to quickly solve the situation." The goddess had directly told him it was possible to handle the monster. Quite frankly, Lazarus had a hard time believing her. Just one look at what had happened upon its appearance was enough to make him think it was impossible for the current him to defeat such a creature. He was even starting to doubt where this creature was truly just at the primordial rank. It just felt so damn powerful. If a creature at the primordial rank is this powerful, just how strong is a god? Lazarus bit his lip and shook the thoughts away. Now was not the time for him to think about such matters. He needed to get his hands on the eye. Silas did appear. He's currently located at the bottom of the maw. Before the others could say another word, Lazarus continued. But Xaherl was with him. It's as we previously suspected. The two of them are working together. This had become pretty obvious to them long ago. It was just that it was only now that they were truly certain of the cooperative relationship between the primordial one and one of the seven lords. He was still unsure of the reason why they were helping each other, but he had several ideas that he was sure were the truth. "I can go to Silas at any moment, but the thing that I'm worried about is the primordial one. If it tries to do something while I arrive before Silas, then I don't think I'll be able to do a single thing." There was still a statue beneath the maw. Lazarus still had a connection with it, and he could go there at any given moment. But going there wasn't a problem for him. The real issue lay in the fact that the moment he tried to do something to Silas, Xaherl would most likely act and kill him on the spot. Silas was currently untouchable. "The only way I can see myself going back there is if the saint can distract the primordial one for long enough for me to get to the maw then." Lazarus stopped there. In truth, he wasn't sure if he could even accomplish his goal if the saint managed to distract the primordial one. His goal was to find the eye. However, in order to do that, he needed to have the mirror, which was currently in the hands of Silas. The problem lay in the fact that Silas was far stronger than he was. Even if he tapped onto the 5th level of emotive magic, Lazarus wasn't sure he could defeat Silas. This put him in a rather bad spot. He wasn't the only one who understood this, as and suddenly turned her attention towards him. "Will you be able to handle Silas?" Lazarus's silence was all and needed to hear to understand the situation. She took a deep breath in that moment and looked at him. "If that's the case, allow me to help." Lazarus cocked his head only to be met with a frown. "What? Did you really think I wouldn't help?" Her face looked like that of someone who was looking at an idiot. "Our current predicament isn't one where we have much of a choice. Can you make it happen?" Lazarus didn't answer immediately. He didn't know either. However, after a brief exchange with Wobbles, he nodded his head. "Yes, I can make it happen." He wasn't going to reject Anne's help. She was extremely strong and could be of massive help when handling Silas. If the two of them worked together, then there was a chance they could defeat Silas, or at least get the mirror back from him. The only issue was the living saint. Could he hold Xaherl back long enough for them to fight Silas? Slowly lifting his head, Lazarus and the others turned their attention towards the living saint as he stood at the bow of the ship, his gaze directed towards the great primordial one. The fact that he can at least look at the primordial one without going insane shows just how strong he is. Maybe if it was him. Turn the ship back. The saint's voice suddenly echoed throughout the ship, his face still directed towards the great primordial one. We're leaving. Turn the ship away. Wah! Lazarus immediately tried to say something, but the moment he tried to do so, he felt a terrifying power lock onto him, freezing his entire body in place. He wasn't the only one. And Inez were the same, their bodies stuck in place. What's happening? What is going on? Lazarus could see exactly what they were thinking from the expressions they were making as their entire faces paled. One didn't need to think too hard to understand their current situation. As expected. The primordial one wasn't just going to let them go. As if sensing the situation behind, the saint slowly turned his head, fixing his gaze towards them as his head cocked to the side, his brows furrowing at the same time. Who are you three? He looked lost as he looked at them. How did you get here? Lazarus and the others wanted to answer, but in that very moment neither of the three could move or act at all. The only thing they could do was simply remain motionless in place, watching as the living saint looked at them with confusion. I don't ever recall bringing the three of you on this ship with me. No, something is not right. Pausing, the living saint turned his attention back to the primordial one. From the expression he was making, it appeared like he was starting to make the connection as he started to rummage through his body in order to look for something, but by the time he realized that something was up, it was already too late as the primordial one began to move. Splash! Once more the ship rocked as massive waves started to form across the surface of the Crimson Sea. A terrifying pressure suddenly took over the surroundings, crushing everything within it as Lazarus and the others were locked in place, completely and utterly immobile. This is bad. Lazarus's eyes constricted as Hurl began to act, his mind churning with all sorts of thoughts. Although the situation was hopeless, it wasn't as though he didn't think things would turn out this way. He had already fallen for the same situation once before. He wasn't going to fall for it again. I didn't really want to do it now, but I don't have a choice. I'll attack. Lazarus's thoughts suddenly stopped as he heard the gentle click of what appeared to be a heel. The sound was subtle, and yet, the moment it sounded, it almost felt as though it rang loudly within the surroundings. Tack. The click was followed by another as time appeared to freeze completely. Following the second click was another and then another as the world appeared to pause before the sound. Gently the sound drew closer until a lock of black hair crossed Lazarus's vision and his entire body froze in place. That's Chapter 669, Meeting Again, 3. The moment she appeared, it was as if the world stopped breathing. Her presence appeared to suck the very light from the sun itself as she gracefully walked towards the bow of the ship before stopping. That was when she raised her head to stare at the massive creature that loomed before her in the distance. All noise ceased. In its place was a terrifying silence that seemed to stretch throughout the surroundings. All eyes focused on her as she stood by the bow of the ship, her black hair fluttering in silence. She's here. Staring at her, Lazarus's face changed very subtly. But it was only faintly. The current him wasn't Julian. He didn't feel much for her. To the current him, she was just the woman from the Empire. The one beneath the zenith. The Chancellor of Haven. A chocolate addict. Hey! Lazarus's thoughts stopped the moment he felt a gaze directed in his direction. Looking up slightly, a pair of deep black eyes stared directly at him and he felt his entire breath leave his body. Did she notice something? Was she aware of who he was? Could it be that Hurl had no influence on her? That made sense considering her abilities. If she truly remembered then. No. Staring back at her and seeing the confused and lost expression on her face, Lazarus understood that she didn't know who he was. He could tell that she felt something, but he could see from her eyes that she couldn't recall at all. She was struggling to recall, and Lazarus understood that she had also been affected by Hurl's skill. Yes, this makes sense. My existence should probably have been erased from her mind. To her, I'm probably just an above-average person with a little bit of strength. In a way, this made him feel relieved. If she were to figure something out, then things would become complicated. This was for the best. This was what Lazarus told himself. And yet, even though he tried his best not to feel a thing, why did he feel so bitter about it? It looks like I haven't completely converted myself. There's still some lingering attachments. Closing his eyes, Lazarus calmed his thoughts down. Right now wasn't the time for him to have such useless thoughts. While it was true that the woman from the Empire was here, there was no guarantee that she would be able to defeat Hurl. In fact, there was nothing that said she would even fight it. The situation felt more like a standoff with neither party moving. It seemed like even Hurl had acknowledged her strength. Delilah also appeared hesitant. She was probably here to check out the situation, but would she interfere? Lazarus didn't know. That was why he had to take this chance to act fast. I'm no longer suppressed by the primordial one's pressure. In that case, I should use this chance to collect the eye. His main goal in coming to the mirror dimension was the eye. It was so close and yet so far from him. Lazarus understood that Delilah's presence was his last true opportunity to take the eye. If he wasted this opportunity, then he wasn't even sure he'd be able to live for much longer. As such, turning his attention towards and he extended his hand in her direction. What? His sudden actions confused and However, Lazarus kept his face straight as he muttered, "Grab my hand. This is our chance." "Ah, but..." "No, there's no guarantee that she will help us. She might just be here to see how the situation is unfolding. We can't waste this opportunity. Let's go." Listening to his words, Anne closed her mouth and looked in the direction of the strange woman who had appeared from out of nowhere. Her strength was terrifying, and her appearance, it was something that felt otherworldly. So much so that for a moment Anne thought she was Panthea, the goddess of light. However, given her dark nature, she quickly dismissed such thoughts. More importantly, for whatever reason, she was staring right at them, and didn't know why, but her gaze felt extremely uncomfortable. So much so that she found herself hesitating whether to take the merchant's hand or not. However, thinking about the current situation, she understood that she had no other choice but to take it. He was right. They didn't know her current motives nor whether she would help them or not. If the key to solving this situation was beating Silas, then she was going to do her best to help him. As such, after a brief clash of her inner thoughts, she brought her hand forward and grasped his hand. Her vision grew black a moment later, and the two faded from the spot. By the time Anne recovered her vision, she found herself standing on top of a large surface of water. Looking down, hundreds of different fragments appeared beneath her, and that was when she understood where they were. We're deep within the maw. She had been here enough times to recognize the place, and as she looked around, all she saw was an endless darkness that stretched throughout her vision. And was just about to cast a light when Lazarus squeezed her hand and stopped whatever she was doing, confused by his actions. However, Lazarus didn't elaborate. Or it was more like he couldn't elaborate. Using mana sense, his eyes settled towards a certain direction where he felt the presence of a certain figure. Silas. He seemed unaware of their presence, or at least, that was how things looked to be. However, Lazarus wasn't so sure if that was the truth. Hurl could have warned him about their sudden disappearance, and he was trying to lay a trap for them. This was a very real possibility. One that Lazarus couldn't ignore. As such, he was trying to be careful. At least as carefully as he possibly could be in his time constraint. He knew that he didn't have much time to handle the current situation. At most a couple of minutes. If by then he didn't figure out the location of the eye, then. Lazarus took a deep breath, finally letting go of Anne's hand as he tossed a coral towards the back of her neck. "Attack him when I tell you to." His figure faded shortly after leaving, and at a loss. Delilah's gaze remained fixed on the spot where the two figures had faded. She didn't recognize either of them, with this being her first time seeing them. And yet, for some strange reason, recalling the scene from before, or more specifically recalling the two figures who suddenly disappeared as they held hands together, Delilah felt a slight pang in her heart. But why? Why did she feel this way? Why did the sight hurt? She didn't recognize either of the figures that had just left. And yet, something about the man made her inside stir. Why was she acting like this? Who was he? She had so many questions and yet so few answers. Regardless of how hard Delilah tried to recall, she couldn't remember ever seeing or meeting him. It was as if this was the first time she had met him. But how could a stranger move her unmovable heart? It made no sense. No, why am I even here? Delilah touched her forehead, feeling a subtle prickle. The entire situation made no sense, and slowly craning her neck towards the gigantic creature that stood before her, she found herself closing her eyes. Her previously disturbed heart started to relax. A certain calm settled over her mind, and her eyes opened to reveal a pair of deep black eyes. A pressure that seemed no smaller than the Hurls burst out from her body as her hair and clothes fluttered silently. It was her pressure that made Hurl stop whatever it was doing, its presence lingering in the distance like some sort of fog. It just stood there, and yet its momentum appeared to be growing. What should I do? Delilah didn't come here to fight. However, Leon had told her that what they were looking for was there. That the answer to her questions was going to be here. It was for that reason that she faced the creature Hedon. Because she was desperate for answers. "Are you here to help us?" Catching Delilah's attention was a warm voice as she slowly turned her head to see a man with striking yellow hair staring at her. Delilah had been so distracted by the massive creature in the distance and the weird man from before that she didn't even notice him. However, one look was enough to tell her that he was strong. Raising her head back up to stare at the monster, Delilah's lips parted as she replied, "I'm not sure." Was she? She herself was still confused about her current involvement in the situation. Right now she was merely here because she didn't want the aftermath of whatever was happening here to affect the cadets back in the Remnant South. "I've never heard of someone as strong as you before. You must come from far away. HM?" Delilah fixed her gaze back on the blonde man. Although his face was pale, his expression was still somewhat calm. Could he know something about the situation? He probably did, considering how he was present. As such, she asked, "Do you know what is happening here?" "I don't know." But contrary to her expectations, he didn't know. This prompted Delilah to frown. He didn't know? Then... But that's mainly because my memories of the situation have probably been erased. Pointing at his temple, the man brought out a certain journal from his pocket. From how relaxed he was acting, it was almost as if he was treating the current situation as something light. As if the monster before them didn't exist. Even Delilah wasn't so relaxed before such beast. And yet... I see. Reading through the contents of the journal, the saint nodded his head before closing it down. Then turning his attention towards Delilah, he smiled. "So it seems like the reason we're here is because of the goddess." We are supposed to help a man named Lazarus, although I don't quite remember meeting such figure before. The more the man before her spoke, the more confused Delilah became. But then his next words made her mind pause. It's very likely because the memories of the situation have been erased. Or more like his existence had been erased from my memories. The saint looked back at her. Judging from how you looked at him the moment you came, you probably knew him but also forgot. Or could I be reading things wrong? What? So you don't seem to be aware. The saint turned his attention back towards the distant Exe-Hurl. That monster. It has the ability to completely erase a person's existence from the minds of everyone in the world. That is the power of the great primordial one Exe-Hurl. Slowly he turned to look at her. If you felt something while looking at the man from before, it is very likely that you might actually know him. It's just that you forgot about him. Chapter 670, Collecting the I-1. Chapter 670, Collecting the I-1. Lazarus didn't waste a single second and activated Lament of Lies. He didn't know how much time he had, and so every little second mattered. As his figure faded from the spot, he turned around to where and was and told her to wait for his signal. I'll voice out the signal in your mind. Only act when you hear my voice inside your mind. I understand. Lazarus nodded and turned his attention towards the spot where he originally appeared and set up another statue. In case something goes wrong. Preferably I don't want to use it. While shifting between statues thanks to Wobble's help was quite convenient, it also took a heavy toll on his mind and body. Not only did it make his mind foggy, but for a brief moment he'd also feel weak. If caught off guard, he'd be in trouble. Still, it was an excellent way to get out of tricky situations. By the time I use Wobble's ability, I shouldn't be in a position where I need to fight, so it doesn't matter too much. With the statue in place, Lazarus flicked his hand toward it, sending a coral to latch onto its back. Then he rushed forward, heading straight toward where he sensed Silas. His movements were quiet and his figure had completely blended with the surroundings. Within the darkness, the muffled crash of water echoed faintly in the distance as he moved closer to Silas. Eventually he came to a stop, his brows drawing together the moment he did. What is he doing? Squinting his eyes, he saw Silas moving around the place holding something. Because of the darkness surrounding the place, it became hard for him to see clearly, but he understood after a few short seconds. He's looking for the scepter. The thing he was holding was none other than the mirror. In the end, he didn't give up on his search and he was using his time to look for the scepter. Is the scepter really that powerful? I understand that it used to belong to a goddess, but as far as I'm aware, it's broken. It's very likely that the reason the scepter was so strong was because of the eye. I can't have him get that. Thankfully, judging from how he was roaming around aimlessly, the mirror didn't appear to be working. Seeing how distracted Silas was, this looked like the perfect opportunity to strike. As the darkness thickened around him and the distant roar of the water continued, Lazarus's entire body tensed, bracing himself for an attack. He waited for the right moment to strike. And then, the moment arrived as Silas turned his body away from him, facing his back in his direction. This is it. With a flick of his hand, he shouted. Now. His body shot rapidly towards Silas, a red and green orb appearing in his mind, fusing together to form a yellow one as his body popped and squirmed, a terrifying momentum rising up from his body. At the same time, not far from where he was and appeared from within the darkness, her body lunging towards Silas from the opposite direction. They were both so fast and quick that Silas didn't even have the time to react before the two of them were already upon him. Bang! A thunderous crash rang out as waves of circular wind pressure erupted from the point where the two had struck. The fragmented water burst apart at once, splashing in every direction as they struck the exact spot where Silas had just been. Their attacks were quick and precise, leaving Silas with no room to escape, but it was much to their horror to see that their attacks landed on nothing. Once the water settled down, and Lazarus were both stunned to see Silas completely gone from where he was. Crap, it's a trap. Lazarus's eyes shook, but by the time he realized, it was already too late as a figure appeared right behind him, his white eyes shining faintly in the darkness. Got you. He placed both hands on either side of Lazarus's head and pressed down as if trying to crush it. Lazarus's face changed drastically, but only for a brief moment, as Silas's hands came crashing down, squeezing Lazarus's hand into a pulp. Spurt! Blood spilled all over. Lazarus! Anne's shout echoed shortly after, her figure rushing towards where Lazarus and Silas were. But she soon stopped when she saw Lazarus's body fade away from Silas's hands, leaving him standing there with a blank expression. Slowly turning his head, Silas looked towards the distance where he spotted Lazarus's figure. An illusion? Did he think he was stupid? Silas's figure similarly faded, appearing right behind Lazarus as though he had teleported. In reality, he had expected Lazarus to act like this from the very start, as he repeated the same motion from before, catching Lazarus off guard. He had been so obvious with his trap that Silas had been waiting for him the entire time. This time Lazarus was unable to hide his shock and surprise as Silas appeared behind him. It was there that he understood that Silas had long seen through his illusion and had just been baiting him with an illusion of his own. Right, it's as Inez told me. He's a master of illusions. By the time he realized, it was already too late and he had fallen for Silas's bait, as he had been secretly approaching his body the entire time. Lazarus was also sure that this was Silas's real body, and seeing how the situation had turned, he didn't waste a single second and switched places with the statue. I've got no choice. As the coral latched at the back of his head pulsed, his figure faded from the spot, replaced by a certain statue. Bang! The statue shattered into thousands of pieces as Silas's hand smacked down on it. Standing in silence, Silas stared at the fragmented pieces of rock in his hand as he turned his attention elsewhere. Ha! HAA! Breathing deeply, Lazarus looked towards Silas, meeting his gaze as cold sweat trickled down the side of his face. That was close. Had he been a second too late, his head would have been crushed into a pulp. He had managed to get away just in the nick of time. Or at least that was what he thought. But was it? A voice soon echoed right behind him, and his expression changed drastically. How? How did he? You think I'm going to fall for the same trick twice? Silas moved, dashing towards the shocked Lazarus from behind. He had been aware of Lazarus's ability with the statue, and as such he understood that Lazarus's end goal was always going to be to swap places with the statue. Having felt Lazarus set it up from the start, he played along with whatever Lazarus was planning, knowing that he'd always end up here. He baited him twice, forcing him to use the statue so that he could deal the final blow there. By the time Lazarus realized it, it was already too late. There was no stop. Now. Ha! Gotcha! It was like a bolt of lightning had suddenly struck from out of nowhere, catching Silas off guard. By the time he realized what had happened, he felt a terrifying pain over his right hand as he instinctively let go of whatever he was holding, only to see Lazarus appear not far from where he was to catch it. Thanks. Snatching the mirror for himself, Lazarus moved back, his expression calm as he sported a simple smile on his face. Not far from him and appeared her brown hair fluttering as she looked at Lazarus. Did you manage to get it? Yes. Lazarus held up the mirror and nodded her head. All right, do your thing. I'll hold him back for now. Yes. Lazarus didn't waste a single second and dashed away, leaving and standing right before Silas, who slowly started to comprehend the situation. Clever. How clever. Clever. How clever. Clever. How clever. The voices started to slip out of his mouth as he covered it with his hand. Replaying the scene from before in his mind, he quickly realized what had happened. He baited me just like I baited him. The entire time his goal has been the mirror. He had set up this intricate plan in order to snatch the mirror from him. Lazarus's train of thought was similar to his thinking of the statue as the endpoint. Silas had baited Lazarus at the start to get him to use the statue's power so he could sneak up on him and catch him off guard, when Lazarus also thought the same, knowing he would do that. To be able to do that. He really had a lot of faith in me. Silas found himself chuckling at the thought. The entire exchange had lasted no more than a couple of seconds, and yet, in such a short amount of time, the two of them had schemed against each other multiple times. In the end, he had lost. The thought made him chuckle, but no smile appeared on his face. His blood was boiling as he turned his attention towards Anne, who was standing not far from where he was, staring at him with a serious expression. Neither one of the two said a word as Anne raised her whip and slashed down with it. Gotcha! Her whip shot rapidly in his direction, so fast that he could barely trace it with his eyes. Rather than defending himself, Silas just stood there, allowing the whip to hit him, slashing his face and leading to blood gushing out as his body stumbled back several steps before he finally stopped. You! His actions caught Anne off guard, causing her to momentarily pause as Silas raised his hand to wipe the blood on his face. I deserve this. Silas muttered, wiping the blood onto his shirt as he stared at Anne. For his failure, he deserved to be hit once. But only once. His white eyes flickered as he stared at her. Then, he snapped his fingers and the world surrounding him froze. Wiping the blood from his face once more, he shifted his gaze toward the distant figure of Lazarus. A grotesque cracking sound rose from within him as his bones began to snap and twist, his body contorting into something mangled and monstrous. And stared at the scene in horror, and by the time Silas was done, his figure had morphed into two. Go! Silas nudged with his head, sending his clone towards Lazarus before turning his attention toward Anne, who had managed to snap out of his sudden control. Her face turned grim as she stared in Silas's direction. This might be more troublesome than I expected. Chapter 671, Collecting the Eye 2. Holding onto the mirror, Lazarus didn't waste a single second and dashed away. His goal the entire time had been the mirror and not defeating Silas. Given the limited amount of time he had at his disposal, he felt that this was the best decision. Although I can probably beat him if I work with, and that will take too much time. This is for the best. The key to everything was the eye. He needed the eye. But how was he going to get that? He didn't have a single clue as to where to start. Tightening his grip over the mirror, he poured more mana into it. But even then he hardly got a reaction out of it. This left him at a complete loss. Even when he had gotten back up on the ship, he had been trying to think of ways to get the mirror to work, but regardless of how much he thought about the situation, he was left at a complete loss. In the end, all he did was plan on how to get the mirror, not the steps after. He was basically in the same spot as when Silas and Xa Hurl had just shown up. I'm sure I'm doing the same thing that Noel did back in the fragment. Am I missing something? Is there something that I'm supposed to do? Yet again, Lazarus felt like giving Noel a good beating. Why did he have to be so vague? Things would have been so much easier if he had just told him in advance how to locate the eye using the mirror. but at the very least he was sure that he had the ability to find it. Noel wouldn't send him over here if he didn't think he would be able to find it. In that case, the answer shouldn't be too difficult to find. It should. Lazarus's thoughts suddenly shattered the moment he turned around and saw a silhouette moving in his direction. His pupils dilated the moment he realized it was Silas. How did he? No, this wasn't the time for him to think about. Lazarus was quick to react. Imagining a green orb in his mind, his body shot away from the spot. Splash! A large geyser of water shot out from the spot that had previously been in water, splashing all over as the fragments shattered once more. Without looking back, Lazarus activated Lament of Lies and tried to blend in with the darkness around while fiddling with the mirror in his hands. Think. How do I get the eye? There must be some sort of way for me to do it. He flashed the mirror around but found nothing. He poured his mana but found nothing. He even tried using his own blood, but that also didn't help. Then what? What could he do to make it work? Sensing something from behind him, Lazarus didn't look back and increased his pace. Silas was right behind him, closing the gap between the two of them. In the distance, Lazarus could also hear the sound of fighting. Wait, fighting? Lazarus gave one quick look and was surprised to see and fighting what appeared to be Silas. Oh, that was how he came to understand that this was probably some sort of clone sent by Silas. But even then, considering how much stronger Silas was, the clone alone could probably handle him if the opportunity presented itself. That was why Lazarus had to be extremely careful as he aimlessly roamed the mall while Silas tried to catch up, throwing a few spells here and there while trying to close the distance between the two. Thankfully, Silas wasn't at his strongest, with his mind split in two, making things easier for Lazarus. Even then, this was no joke. Lazarus could even feel several creatures stirring right below them, evidently shaken by everything that was happening on the surface. I need to find it quickly. Things will get rather troublesome if the creatures come up and start to interfere with. It was in the midst of his thoughts that Lazarus suddenly paused. For a moment his steps faltered and his speed slowed down. Though it was only for a brief moment, it was enough for Silas to catch up to him as his outstretched hand reached out for him, trying to grasp him. Got you. But he ended up catching the air as Lazarus's figure faded into nothing. An illusion. When Silas realized, he looked up to see that the gap between him and Lazarus had increased and his expression twisted. He shot forward with even more speed. Although he was aware of this, Lazarus didn't care at all as his mind churned with all sorts of thoughts. Without wasting a second, he reached out for his ring and pulled out the concentrated blood he had collected from all of the monsters with Pebble before. Although he had used most of the egg, he had conserved a bit for later. The blood looked extremely useful, so he kept it just in case. And now, he was planning on testing whether the blood might be able to help him detect the eye. The scepter did get broken by the outer being. Although diluted, the blood is still there, so the mirror might be able to help me find something. Lazarus himself didn't know if this was going to work or not. It was just a wild theory from his side, but it was worth a shot, and as such, without wasting any time, he poured the blood on top of the mirror. This better work. The moment he poured the blood into the mirror, Lazarus expected some large reaction. Maybe a blinding light like before, or a vibration. Just anything that would tell him that his actions had worked. But reality was cruel. Pouring the blood onto the mirror and watching as it flowed into it, Lazarus was quickly left disappointed. Nothing. He didn't get a single reaction. Lazarus felt his heart sink. However, before he could even have the chance to process the situation, he felt movement coming from behind him, and he thus knew that Silas had caught up to him once more. Pulling the mirror down, Lazarus could only move away once more. But right as he moved, the reaction that he had been so desperate to feel finally came, and the mirror in his hand started to vibrate. Lazarus was almost tempted to pull the mirror back up to see what the changes were, but he understood that this wasn't the right time for him to do so as he looked behind him to see Silas right on his toes. Without much fear, Lazarus retrieved his sword and slashed in Silas's direction. Clank. Only for his attack to be effortlessly swatted away by Silas, who faded from the spot and appeared right behind him. He was fast, extremely so, and by the time Lazarus realized what had happened, it was too late. Bang! He felt a powerful blast on his shoulder, sending him skidding away as he heard a loud crack. Lazarus didn't know for how long he skidded in the water, but it couldn't have been for long as Silas appeared once more, his hand outstretched as a magic circle appeared, growing bright in a matter of seconds as the runes set themselves into place. Oh shit! Unable to dodge, Lazarus crossed his arms together as he imagined a purple orb and braced for the attack. Bang! The force of the impact sent him crashing down the surface of the water, sinking deep into the fragmented water of the maw as his body sank down and he saw bubbles quickly rise up from his mouth. The water was cold, freezing almost, and his surroundings grew completely dark. He could neither see nor hear a thing as he sank within the depths of the water. However, even though he couldn't see or hear, he understood that Silas was quickly going to follow up with something. Swoosh! Lazarus shot down rapidly, his body moving down the fragmented water as he felt the cold seep deep into his body and his chest slowly starting to cave in due to the pressure. Thankfully, this wasn't the first time he had gone down the depths of the ocean. He had gone through worse, and he also learned how to breathe. Flicking his hand, a coral appeared, casting a dim light over his surroundings as he quickly whipped out the mirror to see what the vibration from before was, but nothing. Looking at the mirror, he didn't see any changes. It was the same as before. No, don't tell me that it didn't work. Lazarus clenched his teeth and waved the mirror around. He had felt the vibration vividly. There was no way he was wrong. He was sure that something had happened. Looking up, he also felt something stir on top, and he knew that Silas was probably coming for him. Quick, quick. Lazarus scanned the mirror throughout, hoping to find something. He even debated adding more blood, and just as he was about to do that, he stopped, his eyes falling on the small red dot plastered in the middle of the mirror. Once again the mirror vibrated and Lazarus's face changed. This was a reaction. Lazarus could hardly hold back his ecstasy as he pointed the mirror towards the distance. He was certain of it. Whatever he was looking for was right there. He had to get there no matter the cost. However, right as he was about to move, something happened. Rumble. Rumble. As if the entire world had started to collapse, the world around Lazarus shook, his body swaying left and right as he felt a pressure so suffocating that he almost felt his lungs get crushed on the spot. Horrified, Lazarus looked up in the direction of the pressure, and it was then that he understood. The primordial one had made its move. And so had the woman from the Empire. A fight between two apexes of the world had just begun. Chapter 672, Collecting the I-3. Delilah hardly had any time to react. Her mind had been so distracted by the saint's words that she barely had enough time to react to the sudden attack. She didn't see the attack coming, but she sensed it at the last possible moment, snapping her hand upward to conjure a black void that absorbed the strike. Hedon. Bang! A terrifying sound echoed shortly after as massive waves formed around the boat Delilah stood on. Ah! Careful! Panicked screams filled the air as the ship lurched violently, swaying back and forth in the wake of her action's aftermath. Seeing the chaos, Delilah's brows knitted together before she gently clicked her heel against the boat's wooden surface, calming everything down. It was only then that the screams started to settle down. No longer paying them any mind, Delilah focused her attention on the colossal figure that stood before her, its massive frame towering over the world as some sort of mist covered its real form, making it hard to tell its exact appearance. Staring at the creature, Delilah's expression turned extremely serious. I wasn't able to sense its attack until its last moment. Thankfully, she was able to react in time, but the fact that she wasn't able to react to the attack until the last moment made her extremely apprehensive. Sensing something again, Delilah's head flickered to her right as she raised her hand. Bang! Once again, she felt a powerful attack coming unexpectedly at her from the flank. She was able to block it just like the first time, and unlike before, she was also able to block the aftermath of the attack, but as she pulled her hand back, Delilah felt a subtle stinging sensation. Retrieving her hand, her eyes squinted as she saw a deep gash on her open palm. I'm hurt. The deep gash on her hand rapidly healed, the blood flowing back into her body. Delilah closed her eyes before shifting her attention towards the gigantic creature once more. Just a mere look at it and she felt her head throb. That was when she understood what was going on. This must be some sort of mind-type monster. It is most likely disrupting my mind, making its attack only discernible when they're close enough to me. All it took was one quick observation for her to understand exactly what was going on, and it was also in that moment that she felt multiple attacks shoot in her direction from all sides. Her face didn't change under the barrage of attacks. As she tapped her foot against the ship's deck, a black film began to rise beneath her, creeping outward and blanketing the area. From the tainted surface, dark, sickly hands clawed their way up, reaching hungrily toward the source of the attacks. Bang! 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 Muffled explosions echoed throughout as Delilah raised her head up to stare at the primordial creature before jumping slightly and landing on the surface of the water, her steps leaving no ripple behind. Bang! Even more attacks shot in her direction, but Delilah remained unmoved, more and more hands creeping up from beneath her and shooting in the direction of each attack. Like that, Delilah was able to inch closer and closer to Xa Hurl. Inside the boat, every eye fixated on the lone figure standing atop the water, her silky black hair whispering in the breeze. Beneath her feet, the crimson waves slowly darkened like an oil spill, as if her very presence was corrupting them. Towering above her, a colossal monster loomed, its shadow stretching wide across the sea. Compared to the monster, she was a lot smaller. Almost insignificant, and yet, to the eye of all the people present, it almost felt as though she stood on the same level as the beast. And soon, stopping right before the monster, Delilah's deep black eyes turned completely black. The world froze. And then, darkness. As if the white sun had been ripped from the sky, the world was suddenly swallowed by a suffocating darkness, plunging everything into a deep and terrifying void. Alongside the darkness was a chilling cold that dug deeply into the skin of everyone present. What's going on? I can't see. I can you. Before the people could figure out what had happened, the darkness faded as fast as it came, and the figure that stood on the surface of the water was gone. There. By the time anyone realized where she was, Delilah had already made her move, her figure now hovering at eye level with the towering creature, her hand cloaked in darkness as glowing runes began to form and carve themselves into her skin. It all happened so fast that nobody was able to react on time. By the time her entire hand turned black, she was already before Xa Hurl, her fingertips brushing against the massive creature's body. It was just a light brush, but it was enough to make Xa Hurl momentarily freeze. That was soon followed by a loud wail as the world shook. Heek! Rumble! Rumble! Enormous waves formed, crashing towards the surroundings as Hurl's figure started to become more clear in the eyes of all those present, revealing a vast shifting mass of eyes and mouths suspended in a series of tendrils that writhed through the air. Color bled from the sky as reality bent to accommodate its presence, and each person that witnessed the creature's true appearance found their minds blanking, their thoughts completely pausing as they struggled to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Some of the more unfortunate ones found their minds completely shattering, their brains exploding on the spot, while the more fortunate ones passed out directly. Swoosh! The sight merely lasted a few seconds as a golden shield formed around the ship, blocking the sight from everyone present. If not for the Saint's quick intervention, a lot more people would have died. Ha! Ha! With a pale face, the Saint was barely holding it in together. Even he was affected by the sight. His mind throbbed hard and his entire body shuddered as the memories of the creature's true appearance erased itself from his mind. The Saint's expression turned grim. If this is how much I'm affected by one simple look, I wonder how the mysterious woman from before is faring. She had been the closest of everyone present. Surely she wasn't unscathed. And indeed she wasn't. The moment Hurl's real figure flickered, Delilah's entire body trembled and she stumbled back in the air as her mind pierced with a terrifying pain. The pain was so strong that it threatened to consume her thoughts. It took her several seconds to regain her composure, and by the time she lifted her gaze, Hurl's true form had already vanished once more behind the veil. Her expression turned even more serious. This creature is a lot more powerful than I expected. Her disadvantage lay in the fact that this was a mind-type monster. They weren't physically strong, but they targeted the mind, and it made things rather difficult for Delilah, who didn't specialize in the mind. Delilah was still confident in taking the creature down, but it would take her a lot of effort. Effort that she wasn't so sure she wanted to expend. Why did she need to fight with her life on the line? For what reason would she need to do that? Was it for that mysterious man? But she couldn't recall a single thing about him. Was he really the real reason for why she was here? The more Delilah thought about the man, the more bitter she felt. Was he really worth it? Was he worth fighting with her life on the line? Rumble. It was as if the entire world shook. Even as he floated beneath the depths of the water, Lazarus felt the shocks coming from the fight that was happening above. Just the mere aftershocks of the fight left him with palpitations, and his expression quickly changed. I need to hurry. He didn't know for how long the fight would continue for, and so he quickly got to work and started to head in the direction of where the eye was located. According to the mirror, it was deep within the waters ahead of him. All he had to do was swim for a little bit before reaching the spot. Rumble. Rumble. The world continued to shake as he moved deep underwater, his speed increasing as his heart raced uncontrollably. The fight above was growing more and more intense. She should be fine. Hurl should be at the same level as her. Lazarus wasn't worried about the safety of the woman from the Empire. He was worried about whether she'd keep the primordial creature in check long enough for him to find the eye. Realistically speaking, all her memories of him were gone. She had no reason to be here. As such, he was worried she'd leave once she realized that the risk wasn't worth it. To make matters worse, Lazarus also felt a powerful figure rapidly approach him from behind. Quick! Imagining a red orb, Lazarus's speed boosted as he supplemented the sky with Step of Suppression that granted him the ability to stay grounded within the water. Button. Rumble. As the outside world rumbled, Lazarus felt that the depths of the maw was also starting to stir, as several creatures that had been laying dormant within the depths of the water were starting to wake up. No, not now. Lazarus grit his teeth, pouring everything he had in him to go even faster as he followed the dot on the mirror. He didn't even bother to hide his presence with Lament of Lies. Instead, he used Wobbles and Almighty's pressure to make himself look as intimidating as possible. Within the depths of the water, he stood out. But at the same time, his presence kept a lot of the monsters away. Rumble. The water stirred once more and Lazarus's heart skipped a beat. But not for long, as the dot in the mirror enlarged right before his eyes. There. That was when Lazarus realized he was Chloe's to the eye, and he kicked the water with even more aggressiveness, shooting down like an arrow. Swoosh. His figure cut through the water before finally reaching the depths of the maw where he felt the seabed. It should be right over here. Lazarus angled the mirror beneath him and scanned the surroundings, but to his surprise there was nothing there. What? Where is it? He angled the mirror once again, trying to get a good read, but all it showed him was a red dot telling him that he was at the right spot. However, regardless of where he looked, he couldn't see a single thing. Was the mirror lying? No, there's no way. I'm sure it's somewhere here. But where? W-Chi. Lazarus's thoughts paused and he looked down. That was when it suddenly crossed his mind and he raised his hand and punched down. Bang. Right, if it wasn't above, then it had to be below. Bang. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions. Just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.